You're listening to Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Don't run and hide. Don't be afraid. Don't turn away any longer. The truth will set you free. And now, your host, the captain of conspiracy, the prince of paranormal. This ain't your daddy's radio network show. This is Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
Hup, 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 hup. Omaha. What's up, everybody? Let's go. Fade to Black. That's right. Here we go. Thursday, March 13th. Almost made it to Friday the 13th. Last month I was like, oh, is it? But no, it's not. It's Thursday. Thursday the 13th. 71, 72 days into the new year. Live from the JP Motorsports Studios right here in beautiful downtown Burbank, California. For KJCR and the Dark Matter Radio Network, I am your host, Jimmy Church. Welcome, everyone listening around the world. All right, let's get this going. I got a couple of, it was more like a handful, half a dozen of emails, and I'm glad that people notice these things. About my little salute was missing on the last few broadcasts. And let me explain really quick. I bow to no one. I bow to no pressure. I've never really had any comments about that salute. Okay, so everybody just relax. I just spaced it last week. and then the next show rolled around and I kind of it slipped my mind and it was just like, wow. A change is good. I've been doing that for 5 or 6 straight years every single day. And it's just weird. It just kind of went past me. It's like when I quit playing golf. One day I just didn't play, and I never went back. It's kind of like that. So for everybody out there, no, don't worry about it. I wasn't pressured by anybody. So a big salute to the proud men and women in uniform all around the world fighting the good fight for us. Without them, there is no me, there is no you, there is no us. And you couldn't hear me right now. Think about it. All right, everybody feel better? I do. But, I am an American, and I'm proud of this country, and I'm proud. I've lived on Army bases all around the world, and I know what kind of dedication it takes. I do. Lived it. And unless you lived it like that, you don't get it. And that's fine. All right? But seriously, today, our freedoms in this country are the freest in the world. The freest. And there are volunteers out there right now guaranteeing that right. Okay, so that's it. There was no pressure. I just spaced it. I'm allowed. All right, let's get this show cracking. Bassist Adam Clayton of U2 is 54 years old. Now, I had spoken to Mark Godet today. Mark Godet owns a company over in Great Britain, United Kingdom, called Ashdown. I worked for Ashdown and helped Mark start that company years ago, back in 98. And one of the clients that we had for Ashdown, we built, still do, I mean, it's a huge company today, bass and guitar amplifiers, like Marshall Stacks, British-made tube amplifiers. But one of our clients was Adam Clayton of U2. And it put me in the position, running the company here in the United States, it put me in the position of working directly with U2 for 4 years. Got to go to all the shows, hang out backstage, hang out with the guys. If they played any shows locally here in LA, I was here. It was great. And I will just say this, and I told Mark today that I had to tell an Adam Clayton story because Adam the whole band is really, 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 really cool. Exactly what you would think. Just very cool guys. But Adam Clayton just treated me so well. And one day I had a friend of mine, his name's Billy, and he was a bass player, and it was his birthday. And I was able to, as a surprise, I took him to a U2 show down at the Pond in Anaheim, the Honda Ponda. And he didn't know, so I take him to the show and take him backstage. After the show, the band took us on the stage. But anyway, we went backstage into this little room. I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning now after the show. And we walk into the room. It's just this nondescript thing, clear the security. We walk in this room. It's dark. And I can't make any of this up. So you just kind of have to bear with me and get into the moment. We walk in the room. Room is probably 20 by 20 feet, maybe 30 by 30, small room. But in the back of the room is a little bar with a bartender. And in this room is Bono, myself, The Edge, Adam Clayton, Adam Sandler, Elvis Costello, and my friend Billy. That's it. And my friend Billy, who was at the time, he's like 21 years old, is out of his mind. And we go in and sit down until 5 o'clock in the morning. That was the group in this room. And it was one of the coolest things ever. And they did it for my friend Billy, somebody that they never met or didn't know. And it was one of the coolest things. And I watched Adam sit there with my little friend Billy for 3 or 4 hours and just talk. And it was amazing. And so when I see that it's Adam's birthday, I've got to tell an Adam story. Happy birthday, Adam. 54 years old, 54 young. And there you go. So there it is. Mark Goday, by the way, his birthday is in 3 days. So happy birthday to you, Mark. All right. Our dead guy birthday today is L. Ron Hubbard. Oh, man. I really hesitated on doing that today, but I did. Author L. Ron Hubbard, born in 1911, died in 1986. And, I don't know what he's famous for, to tell you the truth, but I had to get it in there. I threw it in. As soon as you mention that word, they just come down on you like, ugh. So I'm not going to be one of those victims. But L. Ron Hubbard died in 1986. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, you guys know what to do. Fade to Black, J Church Radio. Follow us at J Church Radio. I'm going to follow Twitter a little closer tonight, and there's reasons for that. Okay, all right. Follow, like, and subscribe. Tonight, I'm going to try to get to your calls in the third and last segment. I want to have a little discussion about some stuff, and so I will invite your calls about that in the third hour. And email me throughout the show tonight, Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. And you know the drill. I will read the best ones that get through our producers and get to me here in the studio. And our guest tonight is Mack Maloney. It's going to be a great show, and I'm really looking forward to it. This show is always about interesting stuff. And Mack Maloney is one of those cats, man. And I am serious about this. Very colorful guy. Speaking to him earlier today before the show. And if we capture half of the color that this guy throws out of himself, it's just going to be a bang-out show. And I'm really looking forward to it. Bumper music tonight, Doug Aldrich, as always, from his album Electrovision. If you ever want to go and check that out and wonder where it's coming from, it's an album called Electrovision. All right. Let's see. What do we got going here before we move on. Oh, the Malaysian plane crash. This thing, not only is it still a mystery, it is pretty baffling, and it's amazing how everybody's coming up with their own theory. The conspiracy stuff is just completely off the hook. It seems today the latest is it flew for 3-4 hours after losing contact. Cell phones are apparently still taking phone calls. That doesn't make any sense. We all know what happens. Everybody knows what happens when a cell phone doesn't take a phone call, it goes straight to voicemail. Apparently, these phones are still ringing, and that's pretty bizarre. I don't know what to make of that. And then I read another story today about the Cocoa Islands, and I'm not some investigator that jumps on a plane and goes out and checks out stuff. I can only pass on what I can read, the same stuff you can read. But this story about the Cocoa Islands and a secret Chinese base, and we've got the UFO stuff out there and abductions, and just was terrorism involved? It's a crazy, crazy story. What I don't get out of all of this is we can have the NSA snoop on anybody's cell phone on the face of the earth, whether it's Merkel over in Germany, whoever it is. They can do whatever they want, follow anybody, record, take pictures, do whatever they want. But this plane with 239 passengers can just disappear with nobody on the plane making phone calls out, talking about what was going on. Nothing, just a complete disappearance of everything. Nothing. Tra-la-la. Nothing. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And we will get to the bottom. I mean, you think about the Air France, that took 2 years. Is that what's going to happen here? It's just amazing to me. With technology today and, what the NSA is doing up there in Utah, and a plane like this today can just disappear. Unbelievable. We got the gallery posted up at jimmychurchradio.com for Mac Maloney. You can scroll down and check out those cool illustrations and a couple of pics that we'll be discussing on tonight's show. So that's there. It's up. It's posted. The Ukrainian UFO video, by the way, seems to have some dubious sourcing to it, although it doesn't change what my eyeballs have seen when I watched that video. I don't know what to make of it. But although it's still, blowing up everywhere, people have a way of finding out the truth, don't they? So it looks like a dubious source. I don't know. The video is still fascinating, and probably by tomorrow's show we'll know a little bit more. Okay. So Mirage Men. Great show last night, wasn't it? I loved it. But I watched the video today, the documentary, and I guess the best way that I could describe this, I posted this on Belgab today, by the way. The best way I could describe the video is disturbing and harsh. And it's not a UFO documentary. You don't want to think about that in advance of what it is. That's not what it's about. It's about the government officially screwing with the minds of its citizens on the UFO subject. That's what the documentary is about. And when you see how this is laid out, and it's probably the best version of the Benowitz story I've ever seen, and to have Doty on camera like that is it's disturbing. It's the only way that I could put it. It was very difficult to watch in a morose sense. Very difficult to watch. You can't help but get to the end and see how things resolve. But that Mirage Men documentary is going to change things. The player for it is up on the homepage at jimmychurchradio.com. You can go there and view the trailer. The movie's coming out next week. But I just got to say, you wait. I'll hold back my comments till everybody else has seen this video, and you watch and see how this is going to This is going to rub some stuff. It really is. It's absolutely amazing. Okay, let's see here. Before we get to Mac, tomorrow night we've got Michio Kaku. Looking forward to that. Again, I've got probably 40 or 50 emails that came in this week, and there's some posting also on the forums for questions for Dr. Kaku. Obviously, I can't read every single question that has been sent in because that would be the entire interview. But there is some really, really good questions that have come in, and I will definitely ask Mr. Kaku tonight a few of those. The best ones. If you've got something, get it in now because the list is really long, and I don't want to leave anybody out, but I obviously can't read. I can't go through 100 questions. I'm only going to ask them 10 total. So, okay. Let's see. I think that's about it for now. Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. I'm looking forward. We're going to come back after the break, and we will have Mac Maloney in the house. So until that moment, I want everybody to stay patient and be cool because this is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Follow us on Twitter at jchurchradio. When I come back, Mac Maloney, the Wingman, will be with us. We're on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Don't touch that mouse. We'll be back right after this. Stay with us, everybody. One 800-916-6232. That's the number you need to call when you are seeking spiritual enlightenment and searching for your true purpose here on earth. www.lovespellstoday.com. They provide psychic readings, love spells, reversal of spells, custom spells, chakra balancing, energy work. Divine guidance is just one phone call away. Call 1-800-916-6232 for your free psychic reading. I did. And tell them Jimmy sent you.
Hello, and you're listening to my main man, Jimmy Church, on jimmychurchradio.com.
My name's Nick Dominguez. Hi, I'm Rex Dominguez, and I listen to jimmychurchradio.com. Jimmy is your preacher.
Amen. This is Toby Kebbell. You're listening to jimmychurchradio.com. Don't hurt me, Jimmy. I'm only little.
Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And this is Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
Yes.
We're of the Honey Brothers. Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And I'm Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
And you're listening to Jimmy Church.
The Revolution.
KJCR.
jimmychurchradio.com.
Despite popular opinion, reading a book will not make you smarter.
But listening to Jimmy Church will. On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Oh, yeah. Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. It's Thursday. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Welcome, everyone. Shoot us an email to Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Follow us on Twitter at jchurchradio. You know what the drill is. You know what to do. Go friend, like, subscribe. YouTube is KJCR Fade to Black. Catch up on all the past shows. It's what it is there for. All right. I think we're ready. Mac Maloney is the author of 40 books, including 2 bestsellers. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts. He went through the public school system there and then graduated from Suffolk University in Boston with a degree in journalism. He went on to graduate school at Emerson College, earning another degree in filmmaking. He then worked in the corporate public relations for the General Electric Company before leaving to write full-time. He's the author of a couple of really cool books that we're going to discuss tonight, amongst others. including the famous Wingman series. He's the author of UFOs in Wartime and Beyond Area 51. And it's with my warmest heart I would like to welcome to the show right now, Mac Maloney. Mac, are you with us?
Hi, Jimmy. How you doing?
Wow, you sound great. You're right there. All right. So Boston, what is there snow on the ground right now?
We got a lot of snow on the ground here. Still got a lot of snow on the ground. It's been a really brutal winter.
And I always, the guilt when I ask, I miss the snow. I miss the East Coast all the time. I'm from the Midwest and I was born in Chicago. I miss the snow, but I don't miss the snow. And then when, I lived through every winter here in Southern California and I talk to everybody around the world and I just feel a little guilt. So I apologize. If I just said today was the worst weather ever here, it wouldn't mean a thing to you. So
no, if it was, above 32 degrees, and there wasn't a whole bunch of snow and ice on the ground, it wouldn't.
Right. So, we just had a miserable day here today. Just awful. So there you go. How's that? Mm-hmm. Okay. We have got, you're a very, for me, a very colorful guy. And we were talking about that earlier. And I just said to the audience that if we can capture half of that tonight, we're going to hit a home run. And I hope you appreciate that. And I'm being candid, but I think you know where I'm going. And again, this is just a free-form conversation. Let's just get comfortable and see where it ends. And as you know, and everybody else, I have no questions. I have no agenda. With you, it's just going to be all fun. You never know when we have guests on the show where things can go. Sometimes it can get controversial. With you, just a lot of fun. And your books are great. The nonfiction, the fiction, and I don't know how you go from GE. No, let me back up. I don't know how you go from filmmaking and a journalism career in college to GE to doing what you're doing now. That is a crazy road of life. Mm-hmm. How did it happen? When you were in school, let's start there. When you were in school, you did the same thing that I did, which is, chose the path of journalism. Were you looking for, were you going to try to hit the ground running somewhere and maybe a wartime journalist? Were you thinking about that, or maybe political stuff, entertainment? Or were you going to go blaze trails there? What was your idea at that time?
Well, yeah, I didn't have a plan, to tell you the truth. I mean, I always did well in writing and like English composition when I was in elementary school and high school. It's about the only thing I did, do well in, let's say. Mm-hmm. And, I wound up in college to avoid the draft, to be honest with you. And I never thought of myself as someone who would go to college. I was the first one in my family ever to go to college. And wound up in college, though, and I just naturally went to take writing courses, journalism courses. And when I got out of undergraduate school, truthfully, I didn't really know what to do. So I went right down the street to Emerson College and enrolled in their graduate course for 3 years of filmmaking. Of course, they just about rule Hollywood now. But back then, it was a nice little school, great teachers, had a great environment. I learned a lot about just everything, communications and everything. But I wound up with a film degree. And the first thing that happened when I got out of graduate school is that I got a job as a sports reporter. So I was a sports reporter for 2 years, covering the Red Sox and the Celtics during some very exciting times. But then I had to go and, get a real job because the newspapers don't pay any money.
Right.
So I was a corporate flack for about 5 or 6 years, and for a General Electric company. And I equate that to the closest thing that I went through that would be going through the military, and nothing, nothing dangerous or anything, but just the way that the corporate structure was. I imagine it was it's kind of similar to being in the military.
Right.
Good company. They take care of their employees, but it was just you can only promote turbines and jet engines and all that stuff for so long. And just one day, a coworker walked into my office and said, I'm writing a book on the Alfred Hitchcock TV show. Do you want to help me? I mean, it was as simple as that. And I said, yeah. I jumped at the chance, and we got that book published by St. Martin's Press, and I got an agent, and I've been writing full-time just about ever since. And that happened in the 80s, so I've been doing it for quite a while.
In a weird way, do you ever miss the corporate life? Do you look back and think it wasn't that bad?
No, because it was that bad. I mean, I still know people who work for the company, or they work for companies now that support GE, and it's their it's their lifestyle. But the whole 9 to 5 with the suit, coat, and tie and all that jazz, and just going around and promoting stuff on as I say, big steam turbines and jet engines and stuff like that. I mean, after a while, it just I just knew that it wasn't for me. The money was good, but just personally, it wasn't for me. So I never really look back and miss it. No.
How, when I don't want to jump too far ahead. I want the conversation to go where it may. But there's one thing that sits out front for me when it comes to Mac Maloney, which is the creativeness when it comes to mechanics and engineering and the thought process of the Wingman series. And I know you equate it to the Road Warrior and Mad Max, and the similarities are there. Where did all of that background come from? Did you build your own car when you were a kid? Did your dad do that kind of thing? Where does that come from? Because it's very creative.
Well, my father was a veteran of World War II, and he read a lot of books about World War II. So those books were always around my house. And when I was a little kid, I used to pick them up and look at the pictures, to tell you the truth. And then when I was able to read, I started reading them myself. And I just always had this interest because, as I say, these books were always around. My older brother was a veteran. He was in Vietnam, and I was always trying to read as much as I could about that whole conflict while it was going on. I always had this fascination with airplanes, though I'm not someone who really likes to fly a lot. I used to collect stuff on airplanes like some people would collect baseball cards. And it was just something that's always kind of interested me. And so when I had a chance to write about a character who was a fighter pilot, that Wingman is this guy named Hawk Hunter, who's this Zen fighter pilot is how people describe him. I was able to fall back on all that information and put together the first few books of the series. And then by that time, there was just so much information on the internet that, it was really at my fingertips by that point. But just to answer your question, it's just I always just had a lifelong, interest in aviation, in different kinds of airplanes and military aviation. So I was lucky to be able to, as I say, kind of fall back on that knowledge when I started writing the Wingman books.
Here's another question that probably should be later, but why isn't there a Wingman movie? Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4.
Well, I get asked that all the time, and the books were optioned, as they call it, 3 times, I think, twice or 3 times by studios in Hollywood. The problem comes back all the time is that it would be just so freaking expensive to do a Wingman movie, to do it right. Because just for an example, Top Gun, though, that movie has some years on it, is probably the closest thing that we could equate it to. And there's a lot of different, dogfighting scenes and lots of aircraft, lots of equipment, and so on and so forth. Well, if you can imagine Top Gun on steroids or something,
right.
On meth or something. That's what a Wingman movie would be, because it's just filled, as it's just filled with just constant dogfights and action and so on and so forth. And so that's the only thing that's what the feedback I've always got is that, the stories are good, but it would be prohibitively expensive to make one the way that it should be made. These days with CGI and so on, I don't know if it'd be any less expensive, but never say never,
Well, because the stories, as big as they are, and you know what I'm saying, but when I say big as the stories are, they write themselves, and it would be a screenwriter's dream to create a screenplay off that, because it's just all done. It's about what you take out. You don't have to create anything because it's all there.
Right.
So.
It would be. I agree. I think it would make a great movie. You just had to have the right person doing it. The guy who I can never remember his name, but the guy who starred as MacGyver.
Right.
Was interested in playing Wingman, but you know how it is in Hollywood. I mean, one out of 100 ideas actually gets made into a movie. But like I say, there's always interest around, and never say never.
Well, I have some friends. So anyway, let's move on.
Okay.
I mean, I just it's a shocking thing. Now, I don't want to bring this up as a direct comparison, but only because I'm a fan. Is you have kind of the same issues with Dirk Pitt and Clive Cussler too. Those books are as colorful as they are. It seems like every one of them should have been a movie, and they just can't, or for some reason won't. And I totally agree with you. It's it's production cost and everything else. And how do you keep the huge story into just 90 minutes or 2 hours or 2.5 hours when they're these big complex stories?
Right. That's what it is. I mean, that's a very good comparison, because I don't think there's ever been a Clive Cussler book made into a movie. But if there was, it would be entertaining. But it would cost somewhere north of $400 million.
Yeah,
I think.
Exactly.
Closer to $500 million.
Right. They took one crack at it with Matthew McConaughey, Sahara. And
right, okay.
Yeah. And I was all fired up about that, and the movie was about 5% of what what was in the book.
Right, sure.
Yeah, it was so glossed over. It was so disappointing, and that's what happens when you write a good book with a good story and compelling characters and a lot of stuff going on. It's either a 3-part movie or something gets left out. They just can't do it. Okay, so moving on. We're going to have some links up by the end of the show for the Wingman series books, and I know that they're Kindle and they're Nook, and they should be Apple. And so if they are, we'll have all those links up regardless by the end of the show. Okay, so let's kind of start from the beginning. You were a nonfiction. You were a fiction writer forever. And then just recently, you came out with these 2 books, UFOs and Wartime and Beyond Area 51. Where did the interest in this subject come from? Because for me, following your career, this just kind of boom, pop, because you didn't do this early on. These are recent books. So what happened?
Well, I was in having a conversation with my editor at Berkeley at one point, and we were talking about just throwing around different ideas. And I had mentioned to him that well, first of all, I should say I've always had, as well as a lifelong interest in aviation, I think maybe it goes hand in hand, or at least for me, I've always had a fascination with UFOs. I grew up, in that time where UFOs seemed to be everywhere, in the late 50s and the 60s. To me, I'm a big science fiction fan. I always equated UFOs with science fiction, though I can tell you that is a definite verboten in the publishing world. But, I always had this idea that just a fascination with UFOs, let's say. But I had mentioned to him during this conversation, and I had only just thought about this right before he and I had sat down to talk, is it just seemed that if you read a lot of UFO stuff, it seems like more UFOs are seen during wartime than during peacetime. And I was especially, when I mentioned this to him, I was just talking especially about the Foo Fighters in World War II. Mm-hmm. A lot of people may not realize this. Well, I'm sure your audience does, but the general population probably doesn't know that, there were many, many UFOs seen during World War II. They were just called Foo Fighters. The term UFO wasn't coined until the early 50s. And I just thought, well, why is that? I mean, Is it because there are just so many airplanes up there flying around and there's more opportunity for people in these airplanes to see UFOs, or is it because there are people on the ground looking up? And, I couldn't figure out why.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, that's a good idea for a book, but it would have to be a nonfiction book. Would you want to do that? And I was like, yeah, sure. Because I had done so many novels, so many fiction books. I said, yeah, I'll try something new. So that's really how it got started. And, we just kind of took that one little idea and expanded it. And then that book came out. And then, as you probably know, every time you do, no matter when you sign a contract with a publisher, they always have the rights to your next book. So you're always bound to give them another idea. And it's usually an idea that is similar to the first one. And that's how Beyond Area 51 came out.
Okay. When you, I want to ask you if you've ever seen anything up in the sky in your life. Well, let's come back to that in a second. But as you started to delve into the history of UFOs in wartime, and I've been over the books and I've been through the books. So were you shocked? I guess is the word. Were you shocked at how much and what parts of the world things were seen in? And because it's not one geographic location, mm-hmm. It's not one branch of the military, it's not one specific war. Like you're saying, it just seems to have been going on for a long time. I mean, were you shocked because you expected to come across a couple of things because those are the obvious ones, Foo Fighters. Mm-hmm. But going back, and were you just amazed? And how did you cut out, because you couldn't put everything in the books? Mm-hmm. So were you just shocked?
Yes, I was shocked. Amazed is actually maybe a better word, because again, I was thinking about a book that would have a lot to do with the Foo Fighters. I knew that they had seen some UFOs in Korea. And I knew a little bit about the ICBM incursions, but I had no idea of things along the lines of the ghost ships of in the UK. The ghost flyers in Scandinavia in the 30s, the ghost rockets in 1946 in Sweden. There was stories that went back to, ancient, stories about Alexander the Great, who had seen, who was trying to cross a strategic river back, I think, in 300 BC. And as he was going across the river, his troops were kind of buzzed by, as they described them, flying shields.
Right.
There's a story about how the Constantine, who was in the year, I think, about 312 AD, was about to go to war with one of his rivals, and whoever won the war was going to be the next emperor of Rome. And so that night before the battle, Constantine saw what could only be described as a UFO. It was in the shape of a cross. He took this as a sign from God that if all his troops drew crosses on their shields during this battle, they would win the battle. They did. Against all long odds, he actually won the battle. He became the next emperor of Rome, and he made Christianity the official religion of Rome. So there's a case to be made that the reason that Christianity is so widespread these days is due to a UFO. I was amazed when I found that out, in the research.
The thing is about that, both of those stories are they're both well documented.
Mm-hmm.
And
you're right. Yeah, exactly. I think the idea was too is that when we were, these stories, a lot of these stories, were out there. We really didn't uncover anything that had never been published before. But I think we're probably the first ones to kind of put it in a chronological order, put it in a timeline with this idea that during wartime, for whatever reason, UFOs show up more frequently than when there isn't a war going on. And I think we make a pretty good case for that. People ask why I think that is, and I don't know. I mean, we don't really know anything about UFOs except that they exist. But I think we make a pretty good case in the book that it seems like UFOs are there, show up during wartime just to observe us at war for whatever reason that might be.
The scare ships of 1909, when that started to take off, we also hear in the United States, we went through a series of sightings in 1890, 1892, 1893. And I want you to talk about the scare ships, but what is amazing to me is how many were seen at the same time. But the whole thing that makes it crazy is it wasn't seen today, where we have elements of communication where you can pick up the phone, you can take a cell phone picture and shoot it across over to Europe in nanoseconds. And so if somebody wanted to say they saw something in Europe today that was seen over here, well, it's possible that they have seen pictures in real time. But back then in 1909, 1908, 1900, 1890, there wasn't communication back then. Well, there was, but it wasn't like today. And they were seeing multiple sightings very close to each other, if not the same day, of the exact same thing, but they didn't have a way to tell each other in real time about what they were seeing. So they were seeing something. And so tell us about the scare ships of 1909.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, this is one of my favorite chapters in the book, UFOs of Wartime, because what happened was the Germans had just invented the Zeppelin, the first large blimp. And they were still testing it in 1908, 1909. They could launch them and run them around in the local area of Germany, around the bases where they were being manufactured. But these things had no kind of long-range capability at this point. Yet, in 1909, people in all over Great Britain started seeing these things that were as large as Zeppelins. They would fly very low to the ground. They were always seen at night, always with two huge searchlights hanging out of the bottom of them. And they look like Zeppelins, except they were clocked at going sometimes more than 300 miles an hour or more. Now, even these days, a modern blimp, the top speed is about 50 miles per hour. That was about the top speed of a Zeppelin. But Zeppelins did not have the capability to fly to England and back until the war started, and 5 years later in 1914. But so many people saw these things over the UK, and then they actually started seeing them over parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. They were, as you say, whatever people were seeing, they were seeing the same thing. The descriptions never varied. A large cylindrical object flying very low to the ground, flying very fast, always with large searchlights hanging off and illuminating the earth below, which some people back then thought, well, they had to be German spy balloons or something like that. But then other people would point out, well, if you were trying to spy on, England, if you're Germany trying to spy on England, why would you have these things flying around with these huge searchlights attached to them where everyone could see them? They were easy to see. No one could ever figure out exactly what these things were. They kind of petered away when the war started. They asked Zeppelin himself, Count von Zeppelin, the guy who invented Zeppelins, what were these things? And he said, well, they weren't ours. You can be sure of that.
Well, there's I'm going to jump in there. There's two key points that you sort of mentioned, but you kind of went past. So let's go back for a second. There are two key points that I need everybody to absorb here. Number one, in 1909, there were only a couple of Zeppelins in Germany. That's it. And these were multiple sightings all the way over in England. That's a very key point. And that's the first one. The second one is these things were hauling balls. In 1909, there wasn't anything going 300, 400, 500 miles an hour. Nothing. So they didn't have any reference point to compare it to. There wasn't a car. There wasn't a train. There wasn't a boat. There wasn't anything traveling at that speed, period. And when you combine the two of these together, that's when you have to just draw some conclusions. And you can safely say it wasn't a Zeppelin. And there was never a mention of propellers. There was never a mention of engines. There was mentions of quite a few that I've read over the years of noise, but they didn't compare it to anything that they knew. They knew the sound of a combustion engine. They probably have seen attempts at flight with propellers or the idea behind it, but there was no mention of either with these. What was mentioned were these two huge spotlights. Like you say, why would you have those if you're spying? And the speed of these craft. And it's a crazy thing. So what was it that they were seeing? And it was repeated. This wasn't a one-time event.
Right. And the thing that is also fascinating is that, for instance, the way that they judged the speed was one night. Back then, England was just filled with newspapers, as they are now. But they had, like a dozen major newspapers in England back then. And so what one London paper did was they stationed reporters in different cities around, especially around the East Anglia section of the UK. And one night, one reporter saw a scare ship going in a certain direction, and he alerted this kind of network of reporters. And sure enough, 20 minutes later, a reporter south of him sees this thing coming in his direction. And so what they did was they just calculated the time between that the ship appeared over the two cities and calculated the distance, and that's how they came up with this fantastic speed that these things were flying around at. What were they? I mean, we don't know. No one has ever been able to figure it out. There are other instances in the book. The ghost flyers of 1933, which were these very strange aircraft that were spotted over the almost Arctic region of Sweden. And then in 1946, the ghost rockets, which were these rockets, again, seen over Sweden and then over large parts of Scandinavia, which seem to be exactly the way they're described exactly as modern-day cruise missiles. In these three instances, and this is only, of course, speculation on my part, it just seems like people were seeing things that they weren't necessarily UFOs, the typical flying saucer type UFOs, if there is a typical kind of UFO, but they seem to be seeing things that were just a little bit out of time. They seem to be seeing Zeppelin-like objects 5 years before any kind of Zeppelin could get over the UK.
Right.
In 1933, they would see these airplanes, huge 8-engine airplanes that just were not in existence in 1933, and there was very few 8-engine airplanes ever built. And then these kind of cruise missiles over Sweden in 1946. Just this weird thing where it seems like you're seeing things that they're not totally alien to this Earth, but they seem to be just like a little bit out of time or something.
How do you?
It's fascinating, but
and what do you? How do you, as you look back and think about this? Because I have my own theories too. But in 33, when the first ghost flyers were sighted in Scandinavia, the descriptions of the aircraft, which were absolute monstrosities, like you had just said, they were 8-engine planes, and an 8-engine planes you can count. I think there was like 2 ever. Right. The Spruce Goose and a couple of German planes. Mm-hmm. Did the Spruce Goose have 8? Was it 4 on a side?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It was 8 engines. Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a huge plane, which in 1930, 1931, 32, 33 just did not exist. But it had, I think, didn't they say, it wasn't it some type of, had pontoons or a couple of extra, right. Fuselages underneath. Things
that you would need to land on the water, and yet these things are flying up where there was no water.
Right.
I mean, it was just in the northern reaches of Sweden, where everything is frozen, 90% of the time, And we also, talk a little bit in the book. Well, there was theories that they were coming from some kind of a German aircraft carrier that was secretly operating up in the Arctic Ocean. 5 or 6 or 7 years before World War II started, but the Germans never had any aircraft carriers. And also, even if it was some kind of a ship launching these enormous airplanes, which you really couldn't even do today, but let's say for some reason it was some kind of secret German ship, at some point that ship would, run out of fuel, run out of food or whatever, and they would go back to Germany or whatever and have to restock, and therefore there would be kind of like a drop-off in these sightings, but there wasn't. These things were sighted almost every night for months and months and months, for close to a year. Lots of people saw them. The Swedish Air Force always tried to intercept them, but never was able to. They would do strange things. They would circle small towns in Sweden, these enormous airplanes, circle small towns, small villages way up in the Arctic region of Sweden, endlessly for hours on end. People could hear them. They could see them up there just circling these villages.
Didn't they light up the villages too? Didn't they have searchlights as well?
Well, they also had searchlights too, just like the scare ships did, and they would fly like in blizzards. People would see them flying in blizzards. You can imagine what a blizzard is like in the northern part of Sweden. And once again, no one ever figured out what these things were. They went away as suddenly as they showed up. I don't know.
Have you
somehow looking at some kind of aircraft that is in a parallel universe?
That's right.
Well, that is to say,
that's where I want to go there. I really do, because how else do you explain it? Could it have been something as simple as some type of parallel universe or world? Number one, Superman Bizarro world, or is there kind of some type of vortex time machine thing going on there where this was something that was 5 years from the future, popped in, flew around for whatever reason, and maybe went back to where it came from, and that's why it was never seen again. But they definitely saw something that is a perfect description, just like you said, of the future, but it wasn't. And I don't know, a 4-engine, and the same thing with the Zeppelin too, the scare ship. It's a very... And if you go back to the Ghost rocket, and I'm going to get to that in a second, but it's the exact same situation. So what do you think? Are you rolling the dice on a parallel universe?
Well, it has
world?
To be something strange like that because, once again, the Ghost flyers were showing up over Sweden in 1933. And then, the war started 7 years later or 6 years later, and, off we go into World War II. But no one ever came forward after they had gone away and other things had happened around the world. No one ever came forward and said, okay, I was part of, this secret project that were flying these strange planes over Sweden in 1933. No crash sites were ever found. No places where these things operated out of were ever found. I mean, these things were huge airplanes, and and there were more than one of them. People used to see them flying in formation. These would require huge amounts of logistics, people on the ground, maintaining these things, fueling these things. I mean, none of that stuff was ever found. So, I mean, there has to be some kind of an explanation that maybe we can't even conceive of. But, they say now that, the current theories now is that, we live in a multiverse, not a universe, and maybe these universes touch each other and there's ways to get back and forth, Who knows? But it's as good an explanation as any.
When we get into the Foo Fighters, and you're right, you mentioned something earlier that a lot of, unless you're in this genre, you've never heard of a Foo Fighter. You probably thought a Foo Fighter was a bass player, in a band, but which is fine. But the name Foo Fighter is, of the band, is a phenomenon from World War II that to this day now. With some of the explanations of secret, projects that the Nazis were working on in the Luftwaffe and defensive stuff, liquid mercury balls flying and, crazy stuff. But these were seen all over the world, and it wasn't just in the European theater. And so when was the first sighting actually? Was it Ray Smith? Was that the first?
Yes,
documented.
he was one of the first. He was one of the first ones who actually kind of documented it. And basically, what he was the pilot. He was a Canadian who was flying for the RAF, and they were on a bombing mission early in the war over, I believe it was over Essen, Germany, and some kind of a large luminous object followed his airplane after the bombing run was over, and kind of tagged behind him. And he went back and he mentioned it to his intelligence officers. And they actually insinuated that he was, drinking or, kind of crazy or whatever like that. And they downplayed it. But then as more and more of these reports came in, the first reports did come from RAF bomber pilots who were flying at night. But then, American bomber pilots and fighter pilots started seeing these things too. And finally, as the war really started going, people were seeing these things all over Europe, different sizes, shapes, and so on. And a lot of people, as you mentioned, a lot of people want to say, well, what they really were German secret weapons. And I know a lot of people have, kind of hung their hat on that type of a claim. But, that's really all nonsense because for several reasons, if I get into it for a second.
Sure.
And this really kind of bothers me to claim that I've talked to people who claim that, Nazi UFOs were responsible for shooting down flying fortresses over the great raids over Schweinfurt and places like this, historical bombing raids, which lots of U.S. planes were shot down. It's nonsense. And what you're doing, if you believe those type of things, is all you're doing is giving credence for keeping the whole idea of the Nazis around. You're giving them way too much credit than they deserve. When we went into Germany after World War II, and as you know, we took just about half the German scientists and brought them over here, and we created NASA with Werner von Braun and a lot of his associates. So if someone says the Nazis put us, the USA, on the moon, that's correct. That's correct, because the bulk of the knowledge of the NASA program came from captured German scientists. The rest of the captured German scientists went to Russia, and they created the Russian space program. So that's a historical fact. But this whole idea that the Nazis had UFOs, that they had time machines, that they had this thing called the Bell, that they had a secret base in Antarctica, and some people claim they had a base on the moon in 1942. It's all pure nonsense because, once again, when we went in to Germany, we took their scientists, but we found absolutely nothing that would come even close to the infrastructure that you would need to have these fantastic weapons that some people claim the Nazis have. And number two, if they had all this, cool stuff, why did they lose the war? So you have to draw a line. The line is that, yes, Nazi scientists helped us get on the moon, and they helped the Russians in their space program. But that's where you draw the line. They did not have any of these secret weapons that people want to ascribe to being flying saucers, anti-gravitational devices, and so on. Another part of the proof is that in all the reports of Foo Fighters through World War II, and later on, after the war was over, German pilots, they claimed to have seen them too, and they thought they were, like British or American secret weapons. Japanese pilots saw them as well.
Right.
There is not one case of a Foo Fighter firing on like one of our planes or one of Germany's planes. So if they were German secret weapons, why weren't they firing at us? So I just really want to put a knife in that whole theory, though. But I know people people make DVDs, they go on lecture circuits, they write books about all these fantastic wonder weapons the Nazis are supposed to have had. And it's just all pure nonsense.
So you're striking down the Bell?
Yes, we're striking down the Bell. The Bell was nothing but a cooling tower for a power plant that was located near a concentration camp. There may have been some things going on in the caves nearby, but see, that isn't even really that fantastic because at that point in the war, from 1942 on, when the bombing, British at night in America during the day was just putting, slowly but surely grinding the Germans into the ground. They put a lot of things underground. A lot of the V-2 rockets and V-1 buzz bombs were made underground. So to find some kind of a manufacturing facility in caves is not that big of a deal. They had to disperse their manufacturing because we were bombing the heck out of them so much. But this whole idea that they had UFOs and to disgrace the American flyers who were killed during these raids on Schweinfurt by saying Nazi UFOs shut down these things. It's nonsense. Now, in the book, we do talk about very strange things that airmen reported during bombing raids over Germany and over Japan, to tell you the truth. But we don't know what those things are. Just like we don't know what UFOs are now, we don't know what Foo Fighters were back then. But I can guarantee you they were not German superweapons.
I want to have everybody go over to the gallery that we've got posted because I want to talk to you. Right, I have to ask who did these illustrations because they're amazing. The first illustration, the Ghost Flyer, and the one next to it, the Foo Fighter illustration. Oh, by the way, so I want everybody to go to the gallery right now at jimmychurchradio.com and check out these illustrations. They would make. I think I'm going to use them for screensavers if you don't mind. Really cool stuff. But when you go to the Foo Fighter illustration, I want everybody to open this up because there's actually more to this illustration than what we have been talking about here. I believe, and I want you to please correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the first or one of the first Foo Fighter sightings just like this? They had said that there were portals and there was windows that wrapped around the craft, and it was huge. It wasn't the little balls that have been photographed and that chased our aircraft around.
Right. Right. I mean, that's another thing that the Foo Fighters, for some reason, people think that a lot of them were these kind of like these luminous balls that did chase our aircraft around, and there are certainly a number of stories about things like that, but. Air crews were also seeing, what you would call the standard flying saucer type UFOs. They saw rockets. They used to call them, the British called them unguided rockets, yet when you read the stories about these unguided rockets, you realize that they were very much guided because they would follow British aircraft for sometimes hundreds of miles. And that particular illustration, which we put together as kind of a compilation of a number of sightings, people would see these long cylindrical cigar-shaped objects, and cigar-shaped objects are the most reported UFO object, even these days. With as you say, portholes on them, and they look like they were constructed of something, that they were manufactured. They weren't just these balls of light, and that's the interesting thing about the whole Foo Fighters. There's a book called Strange Company by Keith Chester, who I became friends with. That entire book is about the Foo Fighters of World War II, and I'd recommend that book to everyone out there. Just a really fascinating, story of how many sightings there were, and yet the U.S. intelligence and British intelligence officers were told to not make a big deal out of these things, so they weren't. A lot of the reports were lost. A lot of them still do exist. But just to answer your question, yes, they saw more than just glowing balls of light. They saw things that were definitely manufactured and definitely not manufactured here on Earth.
As you looked into the Foo Fighter phenomenon, did you ever draw any conclusions about why the sensation of it was kind of poo-pooed, and why they tried to, squash the story? What were the reasons for that? I mean, was it because maybe the fear of maybe it was a German secret weapon? And that there's that side of it, and the flip side of that is, did they ever consider, an off-world solution, to what the Foo Fighters were? Well,
the reason that they didn't pay that much attention to them was that, number one, when it came to the British and the Americans, the Allies, their number one goal was to beat Germany. And, it was not a foregone conclusion there for a while.
Right.
So they really couldn't be concentrating on, what these things might be, where they had a bigger job ahead of them. The British were more or less convinced that they were German secret weapons for longer than the United States was. The U.S. pilots were just told, mention it, and they would, they would wind up on, let's say, a lower tier of intelligence reports, but very few of them would make their way, up the ladder, because once again, it was like, we don't want to hear about this Flash Gordon stuff. We have a war to win, that type of thing. No one, nothing I ever saw indicated that the British or the Americans were thinking, hey, these things may be from, someplace else. However, there was a story that we have in the book where Winston Churchill was shown a photograph of a Foo Fighter that had been trailing a Lancaster patrol bomber. And it's supposedly one of the clearest pictures of a Foo Fighter taken during World War II. He was shown this photo, and what he did immediately was he embargoed it for 50 years. He decreed that no one should see this photo for 50 years, and it was taken, I think, in 1944. As it turned out, the photo was subsequently destroyed. But the reason he didn't want that to happen is that he knew that this thing was not made on Earth. And he was afraid that if that became public knowledge, that all the religions around the world would collapse. Because let's face it, our religions are all, based on beliefs that are held here on Earth and really nowhere else. And he thought that religion was the foundation of civilization, and he wasn't going to release this picture and be the person who was accused of, ending, civilization as we know it on Earth. So he may have had an inclination or an inkling that these things, weren't from around here. We don't know what was going on as far as, let's say, the deep intelligence units that were connected to the Pentagon at the time. We know that there was a group of people who came out to follow this one particular night fighting group in France, American night fighters in France at the end of the war. They flew several missions with these people. They did see some Foo Fighters, they believe, and they wrote up some report, and that report went back to Washington, never to be seen again. But again, I never saw anything that, anyone ever came out and said, these things look like they're from outer space.
The media really was onto the story, and the media, the newspapers love that Foo Fighter headline. We've all seen those. Mm-hmm. But never, and you're right, I never saw anything back then. I mean, it just wasn't part of the thought process. Right. The off-world ET from Mars, and there wasn't any comments, but they certainly wanted to know, and the press did not have a problem with telling the story. You know what I mean? But for some reason, it just never went anywhere. And back to the Churchill situation. Were there? I know that I've heard about that picture being destroyed. Were there any copies of it? Do you know that you were aware of?
I've never seen any indication that there were any copies, and if there were, I think that we would have seen it at some point. Those things tend to leak out. So this might have been the only photograph. And
I've seen photographs of Lancasters being trailed by Foo Fighters, and they were always some were black, little black burst, and some were white, and some were large, and some were small. I've seen maybe 3, 4, 5 photographs, but I'm just wondering if one of those was the one that Churchill saw, so maybe it was a copy of it, or was his even better than the ones that are out there?
Yeah, the description that we have in the book is that this was, the
definitive,
clearest picture ever taken of a Foo Fighter, and I've never seen it. If it's locked away somewhere in Buckingham Palace, who knows? But I think I think most people believe that it was destroyed at some point.
Who did these illustrations for you?
That's an artist named Mike Dominic. He lives up in Nova Scotia, and he and I worked together closely on just getting the right look, because we realized early on, I said to my editor, I know you want images in the book, but there are no, images that we can, there's no photographs that we can do of like scare ships or ghost flyers or whatever.
Right.
So we got together, I got together with Mike Dominic, and he produced those images that people love. The images, in fact, that image you were talking about that shows the ghost flyer,
right,
which I think is just this very stark image, of this guy. He's outside his hut in Sweden. It's land of the midnight sun and all that stuff, and there's this just very strange airplane flying over. Has these searchlights hanging off it. About a year and a half ago, I was contacted by a band up in Seattle who were looking for a name for their band, and they asked if they could be called the Ghost Flyers and use that as their album cover. So we said, sure. So I think their album came out about 3 or 4 months ago. That's the cover of the album.
It's a wonderful illustration, and this guy's really talented. And I'm going to say the obvious. Does he have a website? Who is this guy? Because this is really good. He hasn't signed it, so there isn't.
Right. His name is Mike Dominic, Dominic, Mike Dominic, and I think if you just go and Google Mike Dominic artist or something, you'll eventually come upon him. He's more like a comic book artist, and so he had to change his style a little bit to come up with those images. But he did a great job, and people always comment about the images in the book.
Oh, our producers and web people right now are listening to the show, and probably in a few minutes I'll get a text in here saying we have the links up. Okay, So yeah, these are really, really cool. And you're right. This the Ghost Flyer shot with the guy outside of his little cabin in the snow, looking in a WTF moment, if you know what I mean.
Exactly.
Yeah, very well done. Very, very cool. Okay, now let's go. I want to. Wait a minute. Oh, we don't have the Ghost Rocket one up. Okay, all right. I wanted to jump ahead and get into the Scandinavia wave that started to kick off in 1946, and it kind of ended the Scandinavia wave. But have you thought about maybe the hypothesis of just maybe, it was just a continuation of that Baltic, northern Germany, Baltic Sea research that they were doing, not only with the V2s, but just, everything seemed to be going on up there in the Baltic, with U-boats and all of the other development that they were doing at the time. Could it have been possible that they were, 5-10 years in advance and just, flying this stuff around? As crazy as that may sound, could it be possible that they had another secret air base up there where they were building this stuff at that absolutely nobody knew about?
It would be very hard to keep something like that secret, even now, because usually stuff like that comes out eventually. With the Ghost Rockets, a lot of people thought at first that they were leftover V1 buzz bombs that the Russians were firing off, because the Russians took over the base at Peenemünde, is where the Nazis built V1 and shot V1 buzz bombs. And they just thought, well, the Russians took over the base and they must be shooting these things. This is over Sweden in 1946. But, they were able to get to Peenemünde, and it had been basically bombed into dust. And a lot of the stuff that had been there, the Russians had packed up and shipped back to Russia.
The Germans had already moved everything out of there beforehand anyway.
Right. It just happened to be that Peenemünde was, somewhat relatively close to Sweden, where people came up with that theory. The Swedish, even though they were neutral, this was so alarming to them that they asked for help from the United States, and the United States actually sent over Jimmy Doolittle, who was the leader of the 30 Seconds Over Tokyo raid, very famous guy back then. And he helped the Swedish defense people kind of look into these things. He observed some movie film that were taken of the Ghost Rockets, and photographs and so on. And whatever conclusion he came to, we don't know yet. But I can say this, that, two things really, is that a Swedish fighter pilot did get up close to one of these things at one point. It was in the summer of 1946. And his description, you can put it side by side with the description of a Tomahawk cruise missile of present day, and they're almost exact. And later on, one of the people that were on the Swedish Defense Council at the time gave an interview to two reporters in the 1980s, and his conclusion was let's put it this way: the Swedish government was the first one to actually theorize that UFOs might not be from this earth. And I mean, that was in one of their final official reports, because they just couldn't come up with any other explanation. And this Swedish defense minister who was interviewed in the 80s, he said, what we were seeing were cruise missiles over Sweden in 1946. They were doing things, they weren't just flying, they were doing things like they had terrain guidance, where you might be sent, like a present-day cruise missile might be set, let's say, at 100 feet. So it's going along 100 feet above the ground. But if a mountain comes up in front of it, its guidance system lifts it up and over that mountain, always keeping a buffer of 100 feet between it and the ground. I mean, that is very advanced technology. That's something that we really weren't able to do with airplanes until the late 60s, and certainly not with cruise missiles until the late 80s. Yet, this despite all that, this defense minister from Sweden back in 1946 said, we were looking at cruise missiles. What they were doing there in 1946, well, that's the mystery.
And again, I'm just being devil's advocate here, but we know that, no, I'm halfway being devil's advocate. We know that they had, joystick controlled radio and television control over a couple of different models of cruise missiles in the later stages of the war. And just watching the film of them experimenting with that was pretty scary. It's a good thing that they didn't have an extra 6 months or a year, because we would have been in a world of hurt. But is there any way that this could have been a continuation, that possibly, because the scientists went with us, the hardware went with the Russians, and then a mix of the two in a smaller scale? But is it possible that maybe the Third Reich or some scientists that weren't captured were able to continue building a couple of these, and we're still experimenting? It's either that, taking the experiments further, or we've got some kind of a serious vortex, time warp, parallel universe situation going on.
Right.
I don't know how to explain it.
Right. Well, you see, it's probably more, the latter, because the former, which would be that there would be some kind of, cadre of Nazi scientists that somehow avoided capture and somehow wanted to keep on, flying these secret weapons of theirs. But once again, you have to kind of look back and look what would have to be going on behind the scenes of such a thing. You would have to have to have the logistics to fire off these ghost rockets. And people saw, not just one or two, people saw dozens of these things. They would see them flying in formation.
Right.
And they also used to land in lakes and completely disappear, which is a whole other type of thing. But if it was this kind of, German scientists, rogue German scientists, post-war cadre of people doing this, then they would have to have a huge logistics of this. Where were they building these things? Where were they fueling them? Where were they launching them from? Where were they getting the materials to build these things when in Europe in 1945, 1946, it was just, a one big bombed out crater.
Right.
Fuel, there was fuel shortages. There was food shortages. There was food shortages in England until the early 50s as a result of World War II. Germany was even in worse shape, and Russia was too. So where would you get all this, all the needed materials that you would be required to shoot off dozens and dozens of these ghost rockets over Sweden? There was nothing. There was nothing like this ever discovered, ever uncovered. So, this whole kind of parallel universe, seeing something out of time thing, it just makes more sense.
What was the artist? What was the artist's first name again? Dominic was the last name without a K.
Yeah,
what was his? Mike Dominic.
Mike Dominic. Yeah,
just
Mike
got the
Dominic.
text in there, getting ready to post it up. Okay. See how good we are here? Pretty cool, huh?
Yes.
I would like to say that I have 8 arms and I do it all myself, but no, I'm just the guy behind the microphone, and they make me look so good. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, these are just amazing illustrations. And it's not about the illustrations, but the more that I look at them, I'm just, these are really, really, really cool. And for everybody out there that's listening right now, if you just got to get hip to what I'm trying to describe. You got to look at it because they're really cool. Got a vibe to a 50s kitsch, vibe to them that I think is really, really cool. Serving the time, the era, but very cool. Okay, let's move on to the Korea, the UFOs over Korea, and the one story that I think is actually being illustrated here in this illustration with the 3 fighters below. what was the size of the ship? 700 feet, 1,000 feet across, some kind of crazy dimension. And
Right.
I think is that what I'm looking at here in this illustration? Yes. Okay, take us through this incident.
Well, the strange thing is that in between the wars, in between World War II and Korea, for about 6 months or so, the U.S. Air Force got involved in the investigation of UFOs. They were just called flying saucers back then. And there was a department of the Air Force called the ATIC, which was made up of engineers and scientists. And they were given the job of identifying what flying saucers were. It took them 6 months. They went over lots of reports of flying saucers. And the report that they gave to the Pentagon was, flying saucers are not of this earth. That was their conclusion. They're not Russian-made. We're certainly not making them. No one else in the world has the capability to make something so technologically advanced as what people are seeing. They gave that report to the head of the Air Force at the time, and he basically said to them, this is not the report we want. Go back and do another one. And when they came back and did this other one, they had got the message, and they said that all flying saucers are either hallucinations or they're hoaxes or they're being reported by people who have mental issues. So now you have, all of a sudden, the Korean War starts. And that was the official line of the U.S. Air Force and therefore of the U.S. military on flying saucers. So now the Korean War starts, and suddenly you have not only not only radar stations on the ground and on ships, but you actually now have radar in just about every airplane that goes aloft. So what you're seeing all of a sudden is not only visual confirmation of UFOs, but electronic confirmation of these things being picked up on radar. And not only that, but they're being picked up on the radars aboard fighter aircraft, small fighter aircraft and bombers and so on. So in this particular case that we talk about, it was about 6 months into the war. These three Navy planes took off from a carrier. They were going to go bomb a convoy in North Korea. And they were planning to attack it just as the sun was coming up. And just as they were about to do this, these two enormous flying saucers show up. I mean, they were like 700 to 1,000 feet across. They approached these three airplanes. Immediately, the airplane's radio capabilities were cut off. And they moved so effortlessly around these three airplanes. Even though they were enormous, they were circling the airplanes as if they were observing them, and then they took off at this high speed. Now, this was early in our involvement in the war, but all of a sudden now cases like this are being reported back to the Air Force, being reported back to the Navy by their pilots. And now the U.S. military is in this, have painted themselves into a corner because their official line is that anyone that sees a UFO is either a religious nut, someone who's playing a hoax, or just a plane nut. And now you're getting all these reports from your own pilots. So the Air Force and the military, they would just completely deny anything was happening as far as UFOs were over Korea. But as it turns out, there were lots of reports of UFOs over Korea by our airmen and our naval aviation people. Once again, picked up not only on ground stations, but radars on ships and radars on airplanes. So Korea is really an interesting turning point in the whole UFO story as it applies to the United States. You just don't hear about it very much.
What was the aircraft carrier that the three fighters were dispatched from? Do you remember?
I think it's the USS. I'm going to say Forrestal, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what aircraft carrier that was.
Were they able to? Did they carry out their mission? Did they bomb the convoy and fly back, or were they just totally distraught? I mean, I know that this case is. I'm sorry.
I think they were totally distraught because, first of all, they didn't have their radios anymore, so that would put any kind of a bombing mission in jeopardy. We just end the story there. That's where the research ends it. But I'm going to guess that they probably just returned back to the carrier and they didn't, fulfill their mission.
This just came in on Twitter really quick, so I just thought I'd run this past you. What about the Nazis that took off to South America? Could there be any involvement between that and what was going on in Sweden?
Well, South America is a long way away from Sweden, for one thing.
Right.
A lot of people, a lot of Nazi officers, a lot of people who were involved with the Nazis did make their way to South America, to Argentina, to Paraguay. The Israeli Secret Services, captured several high Nazi officials, brought them back to face trial. But I mean, what kind of a scenario is that? Is that somehow, these people are building these cruise missiles in the jungles of South America in 1946 and then schlepping them all the way back up to fire them over Sweden?
Throwing on a boat.
I'm still going with the parallel universe theory.
Well, but some of the best bratwurst, is in Paraguay. That's what I hear.
Interesting.
Just this sighting over the Korean War, and I remember the first time that I had read about it, and I don't know if it was in your book, if it was somewhere else, but this was the first. What everybody needs to realize is this. I'm going to try to get the entire thought out in one shot here. This is right after World War II, and we went from, right on the heels of World War II, bam, we're in another war, and I think that history and time has allowed us to distort that memory just a little bit. I don't think everybody realizes now, how close those wars were together. But what made those wars very different was the technological advance that we had made. Now we had a war with jet fighters. Now we had planes traveling at real speeds, closing in on, Mach 1. Not quite there, but the thought of actually getting that fast was right in front of us, and we knew that we were truly in the jet age. And so now for these pilots are now jet fighter pilots. You know what I mean? And they are used to, they're a little acclimated now to seeing things move at a very fast rate. So if you were in World War II, World War I, 1930, and you were saying something was traveling at 200 miles an hour, that was really fast. Now we're in the Korean War, and now 600 miles an hour, 550 miles an hour, seeing craft like that. Now, you know what I mean? They have a way to quantify, to understand what they're looking at. And they said that these flying saucers were traveling at Mach 2. I don't even think Mach was a word in World War II. Okay, right. Do you understand what I'm saying?
It certainly wasn't in the measurement of how fast aircraft were going.
Exactly.
No one ever came anywhere close to it, really.
And they were saying that these guys are going 4,000 miles an hour. Now that is Mach 2. I'm sorry, 1,200 miles an hour. And so when you start thinking like that, I really believe that they saw something. And in 1950, you're coming off of the 1947 and Kenneth Arnold, but still, if you weren't looking out for those news reports, you probably didn't even hear about it or know about it. And so for them to describe this like they did in 1950 says to me they saw something, and they saw something extraordinary, and they saw two of them.
Right. There was that was like the incident that we led off the chapter with, and there were many, many more incidents after that of, once again, flying saucers, trailing airplanes, and showing up over battlefields. And the U.S. military was always in this position of having to come up with some kind of a reason for it. So they would have, like, for instance, they would say that at one point a UFO followed a B-29 bomber, whose crew were all World War II veterans, by the way, and traveled alongside it, parallel to it for miles, for more than an hour. And the official explanation was that it was an enemy flare. They had to come up with all these like very strange kind of twisted kind of explanations, because they could not go against their own party line, which was they were, only UFOs were only seen by, kooks and religious fanatics. The interesting thing too with Korea is what we're getting at is, and as you say, now we have lots of jet fighter pilots. Suddenly you have people moving through the sky at really fast speeds. And what it is military pilots are actually our best witnesses of UFOs because they're flying up there. I mean, then and now, they're flying up there, and a lot of these people have lots of hours in the cockpit, and they have seen many strange things that can be explained. So they know when they are seeing Venus. They know when they're seeing the glow of the sunset or the sunrise. They know when they're seeing, a meteor or something. They know when they're seeing the glare of the sun off another airplane. And when they see something strange in the sky and it doesn't fit any of these things that they've seen before, then that's a UFO. But the downside of that is since the early 50s, U.S. fighter pilots have been, let's say, persuaded not to report UFOs, at least publicly. They report them privately. So we have this vast pool of people who have seen, of knowledgeable people who have seen UFOs, but they can't say anything about it. And that's what's strange. I believe that the U.S. cover-up of UFOs began right before Korea started, when they came up with this thing that only people who are crazy report UFOs. And they've never been able to kind of dig themselves out of that hole. And once again, it's a shame because if those pilots could actually tell us what they saw over the years, just think of how much more knowledge we would have of UFO sightings, that we could kind of, approach this thing once again from a scientific point of view, from these really good eyewitness reports, and try to figure out exactly what's going on here. But because the U.S. military is what it is,
right,
and they've been covering this stuff up all this time,
right,
we're never going to get to that information pool. If you know.
Well, the whole tin foil hat, scenario, it's now so clouded. You're absolutely right. Now they can't. What choice do they have? They can't backpedal. And the way that they have twisted it up for so many years, there isn't a way to go backwards now. Now,
there is a way to do it, though. If I could just inject this.
Quickly, go ahead.
Is that and this person isn't going to be me. It would be someone who would have to have a lot of clout. Okay, but what people should do, or what someone in power should do, is just say to the military, listen. We know that over the years you have told, your personnel, whether they be fighter pilots or people on the ground, people who have seen UFOs, you have told them, don't talk about these things for national security reasons. My own brother, who was a jet engine mechanic, saw a flying saucer, a UFO came right down on his airplane in the middle of the night in Charleston Air Force Base in South Carolina. And he was locked up in a room for 3 days and finally had to sign an affidavit saying that what he saw was a reentry vehicle from Cape Canaveral, just to get out of it, just to get out of it. There was probably thousands of instances like his where U.S. servicemen were told not to talk. Well, how about asking the Pentagon to lift that, to give everyone, to lift that off the burden of these veterans, to give them immunity to come out and speak about UFOs. Can you imagine the tidal wave of sighting reports, past and present, that we would get these days? And once again, my point of view is that you have to approach looking at UFOs from a scientific direction, okay? All these things, all these claims about the Nazis being on the moon and all this stuff, that's the thing, in my mind, that clouds the issue. The more credible reports you have that you can dig into, the closer we're going to come to figure out what the UFO puzzle is. And the U.S. military is sitting on, a Fort Knox of information. Yet they, for reasons that we've discussed before, chose not to release it. Well, give immunity to all these people. Let them say, all right, we're releasing you from your vow. Go public on what you saw UFO-wise during your service days. I think we'd have an avalanche of new cases that we could look into. And as I say, get closer to figuring out exactly what's going on.
Sounds like a future petition to the White House, whitehouse.gov.
There you go.
I'm serious, too.
Maybe
that's a great idea. No, that's a great idea. Okay, before we get out of this era, what did you uncover about the Soviets possibly capturing their real technology and the original flying saucers and scurried those off to Moscow and beyond. Plenty of reports about it. What did you find?
Well, it's like it's a parallel story to, has the U.S. government, for instance, recovered UFOs at Roswell and other places and, back engineering them and so on and so forth. The Russians have a place called Kapustin Yar, and it's in the middle of, it's actually in the southern part of what once used to be the Soviet Union. And it's a combination Area 51 and Cape Canaveral. They do some of their space launches from there, but they do a lot of their kind of secret aircraft design and testing there as well. Supposedly, since the end of World War II, when they built this place, they have any UFO, quote unquote, UFO that has crashed in Russia, they have brought it to Kapustin Yar, and that's where they back engineer it. Well, you see, those stories have as much credibility as the ones that saying that we're back engineering UFOs at Area 51. I've never seen any kind of evidence, credible evidence to say that any of this is going on at Area 51 or at Kapustin Yar or anywhere else. But, if the question is, do the Russians have a place where they might be pulling apart crashed UFOs and reverse engineering them? Well, if they do have that place is Kapustin Yar.
But okay, but I'm referring directly to the Nazi, the alleged Nazi UFO, not UFO, flying saucer, technology. And I know that there's a flood of stuff all over the net. You can go look at Vril, this. Different blueprints, and some were created after the war by creative artists, some weren't, but and some of those craft were actually built and tested, and there's photographs of that too. I don't know if they're faked or not, but the stories are the Russians got that stuff. Have you ever been able to verify anything about the Russians taking something that flew or not? I mean, but did they ever take anything across the border?
Well, they certainly took, engineering plans for various aircraft and so on and so forth. But we have to remember, once again, that the most advanced weapon, area weapon that the Germans were able to field during World War II was the Me-262 jet fighter.
Yep.
They did have the first jet fighter. There's no qualms about that. And it did see operational use towards the end of the war. But what you have to realize, too, and I didn't realize it until we did the research for the book, is that by the time the Me-262 was flying, which was really kind of at the beginning of 1944, end of 1943, the Germans were so strapped for just the basics that they would need to build an airplane, never mind an airplane, a jet fighter, the first jet fighter, that the cockpit of the Me-262 was made of plywood, because they couldn't afford, or they didn't have enough steel to put the pilot in a steel cockpit. So these guys are flying these jet fighters in a wooden cockpit, which is really bad if you suddenly get shot down or if you crash. Now, if the Germans had the resources to have flying saucers, to have wonder weapons, no matter what side, captured them at the end of the war, I mean, it would stand to reason that they wouldn't have been making their jet fighters out of plywood. Once again, to have these wonder weapons that some people are going around the country saying, were items of fact. If you really look into it, to have something like this, you would have to have a vast logistical chain. You would have to have vast resources. You would have to have engineers, scientists, pilots, designers, all involved in creating these wonder weapons, and none of those people and none of those logistics ever existed because we took over Germany. We know exactly what they had because we took the cream of their German scientists and brought them over to create NASA. If those German scientists who created NASA had their hands on an anti-gravitational machine, why did it take us so long to go to the moon, and why did we go there by the most inefficient means possible, which is a liquid fuel rocket?
Right. Well, it was only 20 years later. That was a pretty good pretty good run of invention and creativity.
But if you had an anti-gravity,
but we did it.
We would have been there a year later.
But
right?
we did it with a Bic lighter. Exactly. I'm with you. Check out this email that just came in, and this came in from Barry, and this is a perfect email. Barry, well done. Okay, it says about the Foo Fighters. I always figured that they were drone cameras flown by college history students from the future who were studying World War II.
Well, you know what? I agree with that.
Exactly.
That is. With him, but this would be my theory.
That is a brilliant email. Brilliant.
When you look at UFOs and what they do, not just in World War II, but in World War II, once again, there was no evidence of them ever shooting at our airplanes, German airplanes, Japanese airplanes. They're always just there kind of riding alongside and observing. And when you look at UFOs as a whole, people seem to think that UFOs try to be secret, but they're not. There's 1,000 reports of UFOs every month around the world. 10% of them just cannot be explained. I mean, that's the rule of thumb. They always just seem to be observing, looking in. And I'm not the first one to come up with this theory, but we put it forward in the book. I mean, isn't really one of the simplest explanations is that these things are actually time machines. They're time machines coming from our future, coming back to see history as it's being made. And see, that would kind of fit nicely into this whole idea that UFOs show up more during wartime than peacetime. Because if you were time tourists, for lack of a better word, you would want to come back and see, where the action was. I mean, when you want to come back and see the Civil War or the siege of Troy or something like that, I think that there is a good case to be made that instead of these things being piloted by little green men from Mars, that they may be time machines from our future, historians coming back, tourists coming back to see what it was like during the great historical moments of human history.
I think it would be more interesting to go see cattle grazing up in Saskatoon, Canada. I think that would be of historical. Mac, I'm just cracking a joke.
Oh, okay.
Of course they would.
Yeah.
Of course, if that that's what you'd want to do. You'd want to, I would. I'd like to go and check out what was going on not only in World War II, but how about Alexander?
Sure.
You're absolutely right. And Constantine, those seminal moments. Anyway, I wanted to touch upon one other thing. How do I jump on this? Anyway, the parallel universe idea in World War II, if you stop and think about it, and I don't want to get all deep and heavy, but they never shot at us. They never. There's no documented anything of, and just like the event in Korea, these craft just did a drive-by and checked out what was going on. But there was no offensive anything. There wasn't anything there. There wasn't any downed aircraft. The Foo Fighters never took anything down. So if they were, maybe they were just observing some kind of parallel drive-by. And I don't want to sound like I'm being completely out there, but there's not much of an explanation there.
Right. Once again, it's the analogy that I use every once in a while, and it's not a perfect one, but just imagine this. Supposing tomorrow you won a safari, okay, what would you do? You would travel to Africa. They would put you on one of those trucks that you see like on Animal Planet or whatever.
Right.
They're full of tourists with cameras. They drive around out on the Serengeti or whatever, and they watch the lions eat the antelopes and the jaguars eat this and that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those animals, they go on about their daily lives, doing what they do. When these tourist trucks are around, they don't have the mental capacity to know, what the truck is about, what cameras are, why are these people, sitting here watching us. They know they're there, but there's they can't comprehend them, so they go about their daily lives doing whatever animals on the Serengeti do. Well, you can almost make the same comparison with UFOs. I mean, we know they're there. We see them all the time. People see them all the time. But maybe we just don't have the mental capacity to comprehend what they are. So, we just kind of carry on with our lives, and they're just there all the time kind of observing us.
Can I borrow that?
Yes, you can.
Can I use that?
Sure.
Okay. I'm gonna in about a month, I'm gonna sound brilliant when I repeat that. and hopefully nobody will bust me for. That is a great way to look at it. That is, that is a great observation. I've never really thought of it in those terms. It's very similar to what Michio Kaku and others have said about, if there are, when you're walking down a path and you look down and you see ants on the ground, the ant doesn't, you're not teaching this ant how to, about nuclear you're not teaching, you can't, and they're oblivious to you. Just like a fish in a fish bowl, the only thing he knows is what's inside that fish bowl. There's a living room right in front of him, but as he looks through that's not part of his world. He can't relate to that. We walk by and look at him and tap on the glass, and he knows he can see us, he can react to us, but he has can't comprehend. Doesn't even know what we are. Doesn't even know that that he is able to jump out of the water and land on the ground. That's not part of his world. He can't even comprehend. Doesn't even think about it. Doesn't even wonder what it's like to go and hang out and watch TV. But he can see the TV, right?
Right, exactly. Right.
So okay, now what happened? What happened in between the Korean War? Which ended in 1955, am I right? 55?
53, actually.
Okay, so 53, we did the armistice. So between 53 and coming up to now, was there a tremendous... I had Clifford Stone. I don't know if you know Clifford.
Mm-hmm.
But, okay, so we had Clifford on a couple of weeks ago. Brilliant guy, very fun guest. And he talked about a couple of events that happened during the Vietnam War. Did anything stick out for you during the Vietnam War before we get to Malmstrom and Whiteman Air Force Base? Mm-hmm. But were there any significant events in the Vietnam War? Any crash craft? Any sightings?
Yeah, there was actually many sightings during the Vietnam War, and we document them in the book. The most interesting one is actually a tragic one, and I'll tell the story very quickly. There was in Vietnam, there was a place called the DMZ, which separated North Vietnam from South Vietnam, called the Demilitarized Zone. It's just 30-mile stretch that was kind of like a no man's land. Well, in the late 60s, people started seeing flying objects over the DMZ. Now, when I say people, I mean our soldiers and our radar stations. And what they started calling them were enemy helicopters. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong didn't have any helicopters during the Vietnam War. But because we couldn't put a label on these things, they started describing them as enemy helicopters. So these things kept showing up in larger and larger numbers every night. So the Air Force moved a number of jet fighters up to that area and also surface-to-air missiles. And on this one particular night, these objects were seen again, and our jets were scrambled to chase them. They chased them over the Gulf of Tonkin. And during this whole week or so that this was going on, the U.S. military asked for any available ships to patrol off in the Gulf of Tonkin, off the DMZ, to see if they could spot what these things were as well. So one of the ships that was doing just that this night was an Australian destroyer. And we have this Australian destroyer cruising out in the Gulf of Tonkin off the DMZ. You have American fighters chasing these UFOs. And the American fighters fired on the UFOs, and the missiles actually impacted on the Australian warship, killing 4 sailors and injuring many more. Now, this happened in the middle of the night. It took investigators a while to figure out exactly what happened. The U.S. Navy airlifted a lot of the wounded soldiers off of this Australian warship and brought them to hospitals in Vietnam. The ship was brought back to Australia where it was sunk and is now like an artificial reef. It was a big story in Australia.
Why did
exactly what this was?
Why did they sink the ship?
I think it was just it was so badly damaged that they eventually. I don't think it ever returned to service.
Okay.
And they just used it to create, an artificial. What do you call those?
You don't
things?
think they were
coral
trying to
reefs,
hide
coral reefs.
evidence or?
Yeah, and but in Australia, this the story was carried, for in quite some depth, talking about this kind of UFO connection. But that story never made it over to the United States. That basically our planes fired at UFOs one night, and the missiles they were firing impacted on one of our allies' ships.
One of I just got this. I just got this crazy tweet in going back to what we were talking about the Nazis, and he said, "What? The Nazis had so much wealth and resources. It's still uncertain where the money and gold went." When you were talking about the end of the war, when they were running out of everything, and that's funny. I want you to comment on that, and I want to move forward, but. That is one misconception that is out there with a lot of people. They don't understand that there was no gas, there was no oil, there was no fuel, there was no rubber, there was no aluminum, there was no steel, there was nothing left. We choked them so solidly from all directions for so long that there was just nothing left for anything at the end of the war.
I mean, there was the proof of that there was nothing left is that we flew everything into them for years after that. I mean, we built Germany back up from the dust that we had bombed it into because, all of a sudden we needed them as our allies to have against, what turned out to be our next enemy, which was the Russians. I just don't understand, and maybe someday someone can explain this to me, why anyone wants to believe these things about the Nazis. Why they want to give them more credit
I can
than
answer.
they do.
Yeah, but I can answer that because it's cool. It's a great subject. It's fascinating. It's one of the coolest what ifs. And when I say cool, if you think about it, what would be a better, what would be a better end to the story for a fiction writer than, the Nazis built a secret base on the moon or a secret base in Antarctica, and they've been working on that for years, and the hollow earth theory. And yeah, I mean, that's why you can't let it go, because the story, like I've said before, it just writes itself.
But that's science fiction, and I love science fiction.
You are science fiction,
but to
Yes.
believe it, I think that you have, frankly, I think that you should get a new hobby. Anyone who believes that the Nazis were Supermen and had all this stuff, and somehow continue to have all the stuff after the war was over,
right?
You just have to ask yourself the question: well, why did they lose the war?
Well, of course. I mean, in the end, those really cool, unbeatable U-boats just turned out to be, death traps that were really nothing to be scared of. But for a while there, they were sinking everything that we had, and it was formidable. But I want to bring up one other point really quick. Would love your comment on this. Then you had the Nazi machine that turned into NASA, right? That is, building our rockets for us. And that group of guys suddenly starts spewing things like, hey, we had help from out there. We had help from them. It wasn't us. Implying an extraterrestrial connection to their knowledge, and that certainly is fuel to the fire too.
Yeah, but who said any of that happened?
What do you mean? Von Braun, and what was his boss's name? His name escapes me right now.
Well, he was the boss of NASA. He rose to be the top guy in NASA. But these stories get spread around that I've never heard a story that Von Braun said we had help or anything like that. And I've heard these stories how the Nazis were getting messages from some planet 44 light years away, and the Hollow Earth Society and stuff like that. But once again, you have to really look at it from a sober point of view. If they had all this technical knowledge, extraterrestrial knowledge, If they had help from people from outer space, which would be so far advanced than we are, why did they lose the war?
Right.
I would just suggest anyone who, is really in deep with this kind of, thought and philosophy, why don't you go out and collect baseball cards or try to get yourself a girlfriend? Okay, because you'll be spending your time a lot better than giving, more credibility and more credence to what was, at the face of it, one of the worst blights on human history. These people exterminated 8 million people. Okay, they started a war that ended the lives of almost 80 million people, 20 million Russians. Okay, why do you want to honor these people with this foolishness?
Absolutely. Oh, I'm with you. I'm just saying there's just so much fuel to the fire, and when you do that, there's a million ways to interpret, or not only that, but like you said, spend your time. And you go and you hear stuff like this, and there's pictures, and then and they just all add up to a crazy end game. And I'm answering your question for you. I think that's where it comes from, and it's just not one little piece of something, or not one little quote or one little photograph. It's the totality of everything just adds up to craziness. And they did build some pretty fantastic, ahead of its time stuff. Like you were saying with the 262, the jet engine itself, radar. And they had radios in their Panzer tanks. We didn't have radios in our tanks. You know what I mean? It was just like everything was one step ahead of us, and their weapons look cool. Those Panzers were cool looking tanks. I don't know how we ever won the war with the Sherman tank. It blows my mind, but we did. But
we had more of them. So what
absolutely
is that we had the industrial might to manufacture 20 Sherman tanks for one Panzer tank, for one Tiger tank. I mean, that's the history of it. We were able to build thousands and thousands of B-17 and B-24 bombers, heavy bombers that bombed them back into the Stone Age. That's how we did it. If they had extraterrestrial help, then they didn't. Then their extraterrestrial friends weren't really giving them a whole lot of help, because they got their asses kicked in World War II. They were completely defeated. You can tell that this is a pet peeve of mine, and I just don't understand people who want to honor these people who are just like despicable to no end. To all humans. It's just it's amazing to me.
No, I'm with you. I'm on your side of the fence there, but I do find. When one of the things back in the early days of the net, I haven't done this in a long, long, long time, but back in the early days, 95, I remember there was a trend on websites, and I know who you are and what kind of author you are and where your fascination lies. So I know you did the same thing. I know it. There was a whole slew of Luftwaffe websites that were showing paintings and illustrations of crazy Luftwaffe aircraft, and some of it was just pure imagination, just artists, going crazy. But I went through and I was looking at so many of these paintings and illustrations. Some of them were just absolutely, just brilliantly done. I mean, really good. Somebody spends a lot of time and creating this, but the fascination for that was out there, and some of it was real, some of it wasn't. But the fascination of how far ahead the Luftwaffe and the Third Reich was for all of us, I think it is a genuine fascination, because I went down that road myself.
Well, again, they did have. There's no doubt about it that they had a lot of. I don't want to use the word interesting, but a lot of advanced weaponry that they put into the war. But, what people have to realize is that, the United States had our own jet in 1941.
Right.
The British had the RAF Gloucester Meteor was a jet fighter that they had built. But the difference was that we didn't need them. we just had this overwhelming force that no matter how many of these ME-262s that the Germans were able to field, which it was never a substantial number. It was a good number, but it was never a substantial number because it didn't turn the tide of the war.
Right.
They also had these rocket planes and things of this nature. No doubt about it. Okay, I mean, in a war, usually both sides are working on weapons, better and bigger weapons that they can use to hopefully defeat their enemy once and for all.
Right.
That's exactly what happened with us.
Yep.
Our weapon was called the atomic bomb.
Right.
That's what we were working on. And to make the atomic bomb, there was factories in 30 different states. It cost the equivalent of about $30 billion back then. It involved hundreds of thousands of workers, a lot of them, who kept their mouths shut and signed security agreements not to tell anyone what they were working on, not just in the United States, but in Canada as well. It was this enormous infrastructure to create the atomic bomb. If the Nazis had anything close to what these people going around the country claiming, anti-gravitational devices and stuff like that,
right.
You would have found the same size infrastructure somewhere in Germany to support this thing, and it just never existed.
With the, how do I say this? I want to say this right. With the, you know what? Let's just move on. I want to come back to that thought. Let's move up and let's get into. Oh! I know what I was going to say. So, but the bottom line for you, and I'm fascinated with this, and I'm agreeing, but I just want to make this clear. The explanation for the Foo Fighters and possibly the Ghost Flyers, possibly the scare ships, and the Ghost Rockets, and possibly maybe even the UFOs over Korea, but that whole group, possibly a parallel time travelers from our future, which I'm right with you on that. But that's the conclusion that you've come to, as opposed to an ET influence?
Well, I just think it makes a little bit more sense,
Right.
Only because of the way that UFOs act when we see them,
right.
Generally speaking, okay, where they're always just, there, they're not trying to hide. We have how many instances, do we have of people seeing UFOs flying around airliners, flying around military planes, hanging over cities, hanging over, following bombers on bombing missions. They're always just there observing. And, you think, well, if they were some really far-reaching technological race from outer space, and they have this the capabilities to do these things that people see UFOs doing, would they really need to be 100 feet off the wing of RAF Lancaster as it's bombing a city? I mean, if they had this technology, wouldn't they be able to see it, simplistically from their own version of the Hubble to look in on us? Why do they have to be so up close and personal? And, why do we have to be so up close and personal when we're watching the lions in the Serengeti? It's just to study them, to observe them, to be right there where it's happening. You can read all you want. You can be an expert on, lions of the Serengeti without ever going there.
Right. Well,
right?
and the parallels, and the reason why I said that, because I wanted to set up Whiteman and Malmstrom, because there are parallels here. Parallels, except with both Malmstrom and Whiteman, the two that we know about, the most, where everybody has come forward and spoken about it on this show as well. But it's the first time where there has been some interaction. Not in a bad way. Well, could be if we needed those missiles. It could have been really bad. But and they were there observing, but and nobody was killed. But it was the first time that there was actual, to my knowledge, like a real interaction where they crossed the line into our realm. Now,
right.
if this is where we need to draw a couple of conclusions. If they were from another universe, from another star system, and they're not from this Earth, Are they here making sure that we aren't destroying ourselves? Is it that? Was it some kind of warning? Or was it us, us from the future coming back and sending some kind of message? But certainly something happened in both of those incidents. And let's talk about Whiteman first. And for those, you've got a really cool illustration, by the way. Let me take everybody over to the website really quick. It's a picture. It's the first picture in the bottom row illustration, but very cool. I'm just got to tell you, that is a cool illustration if I've ever seen one. And I think that's my new screensaver. So everybody go there. Let's talk about Whiteman first. What happened at Whiteman? Let's just start from the beginning, and then we'll talk about Malmstrom. I want to talk about Whiteman first because it happened first. Whiteman happened about a month or about a year later.
Right. Well, in 1966, June of 1966. Well, we should say the Whiteman Air Force Base. It's out in Missouri. It's it's about an hour or so from Kansas City, Missouri. It's out in the kind of the prairie part of Missouri. And these days, it's the central base for the B-2 stealth bomber. I mean, it's from Whiteman Air Force Base that stealth bombers take off and fly nonstop bombing missions to Afghanistan. They were doing it to flying them over Serbia during that whole problem there in the late 90s, and Iraq. The B-2 is just a fantastic airplane that you can fly it all the way over there and come back without stopping. So the B-2s are now headquartered at Whiteman. But back in the 60s, Whiteman was just an even more vast facility that had, I believe, about 100 ICBM silos. And what these were ICBMs are obviously nuclear-tipped missiles that we, the United States, had hidden in the ground in case there was a war with the Russians or whoever else. These things would be launched and basically would obliterate whoever they were appointed at. Now, each missile has 5 nuclear warheads on it, and each silo is built quite a bit distance away from each other. I think some of them were as many as 20 miles apart. A lot of this stuff is remote controlled and or is actually controlled from a command center. So not every missile silo has people in it. So on this particular night in June of 1966, in the afternoon, a UFO suddenly shows up on the radar at Whiteman Air Force Base. And as they watched this thing, it flew over for the next 2 hours. It flew and stopped, flew over every missile silo in the Whiteman Air Force Base range. And it was actually 150 missiles, so 150 silos. This thing flew a flight path over it. And as it flew over these silos, all the power shut down on the silo.
So I want everybody to understand. Let's be very clear here. This sighting went on for 2 hours and was observed by the entire base. They're watching this thing light up, right? Every one silo after another 150 times.
Right.
Am I correct?
Right. Went over 150 silos, and every time it passed over it, all the power would go out. And as soon as it had passed over, the power would come back on. So now, as you say, this is a good example of UFOs no longer being observers, but actually kind of taking an active role in what we're up to. And it just happens to be what we're up to is, having this huge fleet of ICBM missiles, which, if we ever launch them, I mean, no one's under the, delusion that we were going to win a nuclear war. I mean, a nuclear war would have resulted in the end of all civilization as we know it here on Earth, either immediately or from the after effects of it. So, what nuclear missiles were back then, and now to a certain extent now, they're just nuclear deterrents. I mean, you have them, they have them. If they launch them at us, we launch them at them. I mean, it's mutual suicide, but at least you're not beaten in a war. So, but these things are very, very dangerous, obviously. There's always a chance that one of them is going to go off by accident or be launched by accident. So it almost seems like with this Whiteman case, and then UFOs showed up over many different UFO, ICBM bases across the country back in the 60s and 70s, that they were trying to tell us something. And I mean, what more can they tell us that to say that, nuclear weapons are obviously a way that you're going to end all life on Earth, so you should be careful with them, and also know that we have the ability to shut these things off. And they were not just at Whiteman, but as you say, as Malmstrom and other bases, there were instances where UFOs would fly over these silos and shut them down and leave them shut down, where they had to go and send repair crews to put these things back online. Now, not only is that a national security problem, because if your ICBM fleet isn't ready, if you have to launch it in a time of crisis, really bad crisis, obviously. But it seemed like they were giving us a message saying, we know what these things are. We have the power to shut these things off on you. And it just didn't happen in the United States. It happened in Russia as well. Very strange. All this stuff was heavily documented by people who were at these bases at the time. Made very little ripple in the newspapers, even though Parade Magazine did do a large story about it, I think back in the 60s or maybe late 70s. Peter Jennings, shortly before he died, did a really great special on ABC News about UFOs, and they went into some depth about these things, and there's also been books written about these incidents. But as you say, you point out, you're right. This is the first time really where UFOs really kind of, showed us, what they were capable of doing. And what they were capable of doing was basically shutting down our entire nuclear deterrent force, at their whim.
Yeah, and the Air Force looked at it the same way that I do, okay, which is, and I mean as an American citizen, the way that I do. The odds of just one missile having to be shut down that wasn't routine maintenance is extraordinary, because it's a hardwired system. Everything is redundant. They're always on the on switch. They're always ready to go unless they take it offline themselves. Okay. Now, the odds of one going down where the green light inside the command center that you were talking about earlier, goes to red and suddenly the missile is offline, the odds of that is extreme. But the odds of the one next to it going red, now we're talking about winning the lottery type odds.
Right.
But then to get to the third one, now we are dealing with extraordinary, the chances and the odds of that happening, you can't calculate. But to go like what happened at Malmstrom and at Whiteman, to go right down the line, clink, 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 and take everything offline, that freaked the Air Force out, as it should. But it also freaks me out as a citizen, that there is something out there with the ability, I don't care if it's the Russians or it's ET, but to take our pants down and make us totally defenseless, even if it's for a few seconds or a few minutes and they come back online, that is a scary thought. And everybody, the alarm bells, I can't imagine, that the Air Force, one, had to deal with this, but number two, have to deal with something that apparently that they couldn't control. It was a flying saucer. It was a UFO that did it. It wasn't some captain, some lunatic lieutenant. It wasn't what's the Dr. Strangelove situation. It wasn't that, and they didn't have a way to control it. And the reports that I've read and that you've read are crazy. They didn't know what to do. Are you with me, Mac?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm with you 100%. I mean,
I could have made it a question.
This is probably one of the biggest cover-ups, ever. I mean, when I said earlier that the U.S. military is sitting on a wealth of information having to do with UFOs, I don't believe the U.S. Air Force, U.S. military, or anyone on this planet knows what UFOs are. I don't buy into this whole thing that, we're reverse engineering crash UFOs. We're in league with the aliens and so on and so forth. I don't buy into any of that stuff, okay? But I do believe strongly that the U.S. military is aware of UFOs, has more proof of their existence than they are letting on. And all these incidents that happened at these ICBM bases in the 60s and 70s is just proof of it because people have come forward. Military personnel have come forward and said these things happen. And as you said, if they did it just to one ICBM missile silo, shut it down so it couldn't work, that in itself is like a major national security crisis. To do it to all of them is huge. So you can see why, in this case, they wanted to keep this kind of on the down low, because this isn't just a flying saucer, buzzing one of our fighters. This is shutting down the defense of this country. So they have a good reason, I think, to keep it on the down low. But I think now, because things have kind of changed a little bit, obviously it would be ideal if they release all this information. But, I'm not waiting. I'm not holding my breath for that to happen.
When I had Bob Salas on the show and he took me through for 2 hours and we talked about Malmstrom from the very beginning to the very end, it was one of the most chilling stories that you can imagine. And not only that, but it was dealing with our missile defense system. The story in itself, you take the missiles out and you're at a military base and you've got, some type of UFO out front and guys are freaking out and we've got guns drawn and you've got to come out here, sir, check this out. That's a story in itself. But when you hear him say, what, as an officer in one of those silos, they're down there for days at a time. Mm-hmm. And they are used to a very routine double check, let's check. That's what they do. That's all they're doing is double checking the systems and making sure that everything is cool. And the one thing that they've never seen before happened to him 18 times, which was 18 missiles. I think it was 18 in his command bunker. With the 18 missile silos at I forget the name of his little. Missile site. I can't remember now. It doesn't matter. But for all of those to go offline and stay there, they didn't know what to do, and that is just a crazy. And they were confronted with that. Let's move forward. There's a few things I want to get to. It's already 9:15. I can't believe it. We did it, and we didn't get to a couple of things. So I want to jump into the Gulf War shoot down over Saudi Arabia. Take us through this really quick, and or not. You don't have to be quick about it. We have plenty of time. But this I have only heard about superficially. A couple of times. I've never had anybody take me through this that's actually investigated and researched this incident. So, and I'm sure for the first time, our audience is hearing this too for the first time. So, what happened? And just, take us from the beginning.
Okay. Well, I just, want to preface it by saying that when we put together the book, UFOs in Wartime, we had probably about 200 stories, and we had to whittle them down to, I think it's about 75 stories. And basically, they all have to do with military encounters with UFOs. And we were left at the end of the editing process with 4 or 5 stories that were just so entertaining that we could not put them in.
Right, okay.
And this was one of them. And I got this, someone actually tipped me, this friend of mine in Russia actually tipped me to what Pravda used to be the official newspaper of the Soviet Union. And once the Soviet Union fell, Pravda is still out there, but they're just now basically a news service. But a lot of this information came from Pravda, and this goes back to the first Gulf War in 1991, where we were trying to expel Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. And one morning, 4 F-16 fighters were on their way to a bombing mission over enemy territory. And as they were approaching the target, their radar support people, told them that they saw an object, a bogey coming in their direction. One of the F-16s peeled off to see what it was. Of course, everyone thought at first it was some kind of an Iraqi fighter. It turned out to be a UFO, And this is one of the few times in all the research we did where there was some kind of a military engagement between, one of our fighters and this UFO, because as the story goes, UFO fired something that the F-16 missed. The F-16 fired something, a missile at the UFO, hit it, and then the UFO crashed in the desert of Saudi Arabia. Now, a lot of this comes from Russian military liaison officer who was in Saudi Arabia during the war, which is not that unusual of an occurrence. He got some friends to fly him out to this crash site, and according to him, saw the remains of this flying saucer. He and some Saudi nationals reached there before the U.S. military did, and they saw this crash site, and then as soon as the U.S. military arrived, they were kind of ushered out of the area. But he claims that he saw, the pieces of this, whatever it was, put in some kind of containers and carted away by the U.S. military for parts unknown. It's an interesting story only because when we were doing the research for this and we were looking for stories about the Gulf War and the Persian Gulf in particular, it just kept popping up. Another one that kept popping up was that Saddam Hussein shot down a UFO during the years between this Gulf War, the first Gulf War, and let's say the second one that started in 2003,
right.
And that he brought this UFO to his version of Area 51. It was reverse engineered, and maybe that was the weaponry that we were looking for when we went in 2003, because there was no nuclear weapons found, no biological weapons found. So, maybe we were looking for alien reverse engineered weaponry that somehow Saddam Hussein had gotten his hands on. Once again, when you're putting a book together, you want it to be educational. You want people to, learn something from it. That's your goal. But you have to be entertaining as well. So, we reported this story and the story about Saddam Hussein's Area 51. Is it true? Who knows? We'd live in a different world if somehow we could prove that the U.S. Air Force shot down a UFO during the Gulf War. But as of right now, it was something that was reported by a Russian military officer to Pravda.
Now, I know that you've got to get up early in the morning, and you've stayed up late for us tonight, and I had to talk you into the,
Okay.
but, and I know that you do have to run, but before we do, we were talking, and I hope you don't mind, I'm going to keep you for a couple of more minutes.
Okay.
We were talking earlier today about the music industry, and one of the things, our lives are kind of weird, kind of parallel in a couple of different ways. But you have gotten a second CD. You're working on your second CD of it's music, but the first. Okay, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The first one you had told me was written. The songs are about UFO personalities that you have met over the years. Can you just tell me about that for a second? And we'll get links up to this CD. The CD was obviously such a success that the record company has come back and asked for a second one. So are you on a 2-record deal here? Is that what's going on?
No, you know what happens to those 2-record deals.
Yes, we do.
What happened was we put together. I've always been interested in music, and but as it turns out, I hang around with a lot of musicians. And so a few years ago, I just came up with this idea while I was writing, actually it was a science fiction book. Wouldn't it be interesting if you could create a soundtrack for a book? Just because, because there are soundtracks for movies, there are soundtracks for TV shows. But I thought, wouldn't it be cool to create a soundtrack for a book, basically something that someone would listen to while they're reading the book? Well, creating a soundtrack for a whole book, proved to be, just too big of a project. But we came up with this idea of creating a soundtrack for a short story, a short science fiction story. So at the time, I was doing a little PR for a company called Voiceprint Records in London, and I happened to know the person who was the owner of it, and I kind of convinced him to, give us a shot to see if we could put this together, and we did. The album is called Sky Club. It's, you can buy it on Amazon. The best thing to do is just type in Mac Maloney Sky Club. What it is, it's a collection of 12 songs. Most of them are cover songs. We cover songs by The Who, by Journey, by a band called Jars of Clay. We cover songs by Cream and Spirit. And there's a couple of original songs on there as well. And what it does is it tells the story of a space traveler who is lost on a deserted planet, and the only thing he has to keep him company is 12 songs on his iPod. And he listens to these songs over and over again. And the words to the song, the lyrics to the songs go directly to the condition that he's in, where he's on this planet, no hope of ever getting off, never see his wife again, and so on and so forth. And a little booklet comes with the CD. It's a little comic book that comes and tells the story as you're listening to the music. So, it went over very well, and we had a lot of fun making it. So, as I say, you can buy it on Amazon or it's on iTunes. It was actually put on iTunes by Cleopatra Records there in L.A. And so we started making another one. And when I was thinking about, well, what are we going to do this one about? At the time, I had just come out with UFOs and Wartime. I was working on Beyond Area 51, and I was doing a lot of radio shows like this. And I was just running into a lot of interesting people, actually. And I gave a few speeches at different MUFON conferences and just ran into just really interesting people. And, some of them were in themselves very entertaining, if you know what I mean. But a lot of them were people who were really just determined, as I am, to figure out what UFOs are. And it was just like such a collection of people, and I had heard so many different stories that, we decided, why don't we just do an album about, all the things that have happened to me in the past 3 or 4 years since I've been kind of involved in the UFO community. So that's what we've done. There's more original songs on here than cover songs, though we do some cover songs, but we've got a song on there about Roswell. We have a song about Dulce Mountain.
Is Silent Running on Danger? Is that from the movie Silent Running?
No, that's from Mike and the Mechanics. Now, that's on the first CD about the space traveler who's lost on this deserted planet. Silent Running was actually a song done by Mike and the Mechanics. People probably remember it as the song called "Can You Hear Me?"
Oh yeah, of course, of course.
But once again, we're working on this particular album. The new one, it's called Ufology. We cover songs by Fleetwood Mac, by David Bowie. It's an interesting project. We're hoping to get it out by May or June. We'll see what happens. Hopefully, be out before, let's say, midsummer. But the name of the band is Sky Club, and we've got a lot of really good musicians in it. Have a lot of fun putting these things together, a lot of laughs. You know what it's like, Jimmy, to put an album together. That it's just a cooperative effort. That's just a lot of fun to do and have something nice at the end of the day. So, in addition to writing books, this is what I've been up to, and people really like the first CD, so we hope they like the second one too.
What's harder, making a CD or writing a book?
Writing a book is about 1 million times harder.
Is it really? You think?
Absolutely, yes. And we're doing a nonfiction book. When I was halfway through UFOs and Wartime, I thought to myself, what have I done here? Writing a nonfiction book is so much more work, so much more research and checking and so on and so forth. When you're writing a novel, you can all just kind of make it up yourself, and you're the only person who knows, how true these things are or how you put the story together. But when you're doing a nonfiction book, you have to make sure everything is right. You have to check the facts and make sure the times and dates and stuff like that are right. I hope my editor isn't listening to me, but if I had the choice between, making music, making CDs and writing books, I would take making CDs, in a second.
They're probably about equally as profitable, if you know what I mean. Well,
if you get lucky,
that's right.
Thing about writing is that I've been very lucky
right.
to stay in the business as long as I can and to sell as many books as I have.
Right.
It's really been just pure luck, being there at the right time, at the right place. The music thing is something I really enjoy doing, and people who have heard the first CD. really like it. So we figured, well, we had to do a second one. You always have to do another one to see if the first one was just a fluke or not. So we're in the middle of doing that, and we're having a lot of fun doing it.
Well, it sounds like you live the life that you've wanted to live. You're able to write about what you want to write about. You're not really constrained. You're able to create the music that you want to create. You're not influenced by anybody in your writing or your subjects. And that, crosses over from music to, so, your soul is free, if you know what I mean. You must be, are you happy? Because you seem happy.
Well, you should ask my wife whether I'm happy or not, because I don't think she would describe me as being happy, because no writer is happy. I mean, if you're a happy writer, there's something wrong with you. But I am lucky. Once again, I'm lucky to be able to do, you're right. I'm living, a life that I've always wanted to live. I don't realize it sometimes, but, my day is filled with either writing books or heading down to Boston to the studio to record. And, I'm sure a lot of people would like to do what I do. It really was a case of being in the right place at the right time on 3 or 4 different occasions. So, whenever I go to the racetrack, though, I always lose. I've never won a dime at the racetrack, so I'm not lucky gambling on the horses, but I have been lucky, getting books published. So, everyone has their gift, I guess.
Well, remember, you could always be back at General Electric.
Well, that ain't going to happen.
Oh, Mac, it was a wonderful evening. Thank you very much. And is there anything else you'd like to end with really quick?
No, I want to thank you. I had a great time doing this. Let's do it again sometime soon. I will mention that the Wingman books are now out as ebooks. People can just go on Amazon and buy them. UFOs in Wartime and also Beyond Area 51. They're at, you can find them at, really any bookstore across the country, but the best place to go is Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. My publisher always wants me to mention them.
Sure.
And, just Google Mac Maloney Sky Club to get information about music. But I just want to thank you again, Jimmy, for having me on. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Mac, all the best. And you know what? Thank your wife for letting you stay up late with us tonight. And we'll have all the links up. You have a great rest of your week, and I'll talk to you when that next CD comes out.
Great. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mac. Have a good night.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Bye. Mac Maloney. I keep saying Maloney. We'll have the links up. This is KJCR.
Hi everybody, this is Rob Halford, the Metal Guard on JimmyChurchRadio.com.
What's up? My name's Brian Taylor, Ninja Badass Extraordinaire, and this is JimmyChurchRadio.com.
KJCR, in your face.
JimmyChurchRadio.com on the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Mac Maloney. I don't know why Mahoney wants to come out of my mouth. It's Mac Maloney. Mac Maloney. Thank you, Mac. Absolute fun. This is KJCR on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Got a bunch of email I want to try to get through and a couple of questions I need to answer for everybody out there. Maloney made a couple of drastic points in the interview, and I'm sure I'm going to be responding to this. But look, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, and his is just as valid as mine or yours. But he's pretty extreme. When we were talking about, possible Nazi and Third Reich, it is of my opinion, and you could tell that he's definitely verbal about his. But I don't know. I think something was smuggled out. I really do. I think it went to Russia. That's what I think. I just don't know if we got any of that stuff over here. I think there was some kind of agreement between the two, between the Russians and the United States on that issue. I really do. Okay, listen, I want to go ahead and open up the phone lines. 323-825-8255. 5045. EM Rosa. You want to audition? You call me right now. 323-825-5045. There's your shot. There's your crack. Call me right now. I want to 323-825-5045. The phone lines are open. There was an email that came in. Let me go back. Oh, yeah, it's right here. From Renee, and she said, and this is something I can't believe has slipped through the cracks here on the show. But she wrote, have you ever commented on the Bespoke Radio under your call letters KJCR on the Jimmy Church Radio website? Would you please explain that? Yes, Renee, I will. Bespoke Radio. What is bespoke? What does it mean? You know, the typeface, by the way, that we're using for that. Maybe I've had a few people ask about it, and our executive producer here has mentioned to me. I think you guys are in cahoots. Has mentioned to me just about before every show to bring up Bespoke Radio, mention it, and I never do. And so I get the email from Renee. I got a couple of emails a couple of weeks ago about it too as well. And this is what Bespoke Radio means. Bespoke means custom made just for you. That's what it means. So when you see Bespoke Radio up there, and you just might have thought, oh yeah, that sounds cool. Yeah, Bespoke Radio. Wow. Okay. No, what it really means is this is radio for you. It's like customized, and that's what the website is. That's why the forums are there. That's what Twitter is for. That's the fan site. Jimmy Church over at Facebook, even my personal page as well, and this show and everything about it, it's for you. And the reason why, and that's what bespoke means. This is very important, and I'm glad, Renee, that you brought this up, because that's exactly what the and now here I am. I'm getting oh gosh, text from the executive producer, just hired Renee. That's what Bespoke Radio is. And I have said many times before, and you need to understand, the reason why I am sitting in front of this microphone right now and spewing right now is because, and the program that you heard tonight, and the program you heard last night, and the program you're going to hear tomorrow night, the reason why all of these are done is because I was never, ever, ever happy with what I heard on the radio. I got half. And I knew that whoever I was listening to and whoever I was a fan of, you substitute the names. It doesn't matter. But they were only able to give me half. They probably wanted to do more, but they couldn't. They were held back. Somebody was telling them they couldn't. And it not only includes words, but it also includes thought, ideas, and news. So everything is filtered. And I made a promise to myself that when I was going to get in front of a microphone, and as we all know, I did sports for years. The sports show was the same as this, by the way. It wasn't any different in that I just spoke the truth, and I made things interesting, and I wouldn't hold back. I wanted to make sure that the programming was as if I was listening to it on the other side myself, and that everything was lockstep, and that everything was coming forward and everything was interesting and everything was going to be informative and you were going to learn because that's what I wanted. And that's what Bespoke Radio is. It is custom made. So if there is a suggestion out there, we'll listen to it. We'll read. You have a guest suggestion, send it in. Not everything is possible. You know, when we try to, on this show, we are able to, and this is the thing, we are able to on this show, and I know what everybody else out there is putting out. Okay? I know. I want to make sure that every single night there's no filler. There's not a night where we just kind of cruise on autopilot. You know, hey, you know, let's take this night off. Let's do that. No, that's not what it is about. I want to make sure, and the producers here, everybody here, Keith, everybody, that includes Art, that every single night our foot is on the gas pedal, that we bring the best, and that is what Bespoke Radio means. So thank you, Renee. It allowed me to actually get this out. Got a call coming in. Let's see. Oh, it came and went. Okay. 2 came and went. Call back. If you're listening right now, we do have the time to take a quick phone call. I'm going to take a quick break, and we're going to come right back. This is Fade to Black on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Taking your calls next. I am Jimmy Church. 323-825-5045. 323-823. Oh, we got more calls coming in. I was going to take a break. All right. You know what? Should I take the call? Should I take it? Producers say yes. Let's back off. Let's back off. You are live on the air right now. You are live on the air. Who's calling? You are live on the air. Who's calling? Well, let's bring up this line. You're live on the air.
Hi, Jimmy. It's Duke. How you doing?
Oh, Duke.
Yeah.
Sir Duke. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Hey, really enjoyed Maloney, but I do want to talk about one thing he said that I think he needs to do a little more research on.
I knew he was going to. Hey, Duke. I'm not going to cut you off, but I am. I knew he was going to ruffle some feathers. You know, and you know, he is just. I want to hear your question, but you know, there's certain things. You know, when you have a steadfast belief and you're committed to it, you're committed.
Oh, I don't have any problem with the guy's beliefs or his opinions.
Okay, all right.
I had no problem with that. I'm talking more about something that's a fact. You know, it's a factual thing that he talked about that's incorrect.
Okay, what was that?
Well, he talked about during the Vietnam War, the Australian destroyer, that destroyer was the Hobart. And he talked about it was hit by friendly fire, and that's all true. And he talked about how it was because of a UFO incident. That is not true. This is well known. I mean, military historians know about this. There's been books written about it. He said the North Vietnamese did not have helicopters. That's incorrect. They did.
Well, I have heard. Well, okay. Well, let's back up. Let's address these points one at a time, because you know, you remember when we had Clifford Stone on a couple of weeks ago, and I think you listened to that show too. And then I went and as far. I mean, when they say that, when I say they, I'm talking about researchers like Maloney and Clifford Stone. That the North Vietnamese didn't have helicopters. They say, and all of these reports, that it clearly states enemy helicopters. I've got those all over JimmyChurchRadio.com. You can go read them right now. Right. So that's the question that I mean, from what I have read, that they didn't. Now, did they? The Chinese didn't have Soviet helicopters. So what helicopters did the Chinese supposedly have?
But it's not the Chinese. They were North Vietnamese, and they were Soviet supplied or Chinese copy of the Soviet supplied helicopters. I think they were Mi-14s. I'd have to go back and look at the exact type. Okay. I'll send you some references, books that have been written since the war from the North Vietnamese perspective that shows photographs of these helicopters in use.
So what about the reference to enemy helicopters? And like I said, Maloney and Clifford Stone aren't the only guys that have said this, and you know this too, about the reference in Vietnam that anytime they didn't want to put UFO. Now I have reports online right now at jimmychurchradio.com that has UFO and enemy helicopters in the same reference. So
again, I'm not telling you that any of that is false. I'm not telling you that's not factually correct. What I'm telling you is that in the incident he's talking about,
right,
UFOs were not. I mean, there's a the night that this happened, there were several ships that were hit.
Yeah, tell us about it. Yeah,
patrol boat.
Yeah, Duke, please.
Hit by these friendly fire missiles fired by Phantoms that were sent in to intercept North Vietnamese helicopters. And there is a naval, I think he was a chief petty officer, who has written a book about this incident. He personally saw it. He personally was manning a 50 caliber machine gun shooting at one of these North Vietnamese helicopters. So there's no question that Maloney's right that the Hobart was hit by a Sea Sparrow missile or an airline Sparrow missile. There's no question about that. But the claim that they were chasing UFOs and all this other stuff, I don't buy that. The North Vietnamese themselves in books, post-war have talked about these attacks, and I can cite you some examples of that. And again, this gentleman that wrote the book, I think the name of the book is Swift Boat Down, and it tells the story of this particular patrol boat being hit again that same night by these North Vietnamese helicopters. And they defended themselves, and the theory is they may even have shot one of them down. But
where do you think
there's nobody in the world who's a bigger UFO fan than I am?
Right.
But when history gets in the way of a good story, you've got to go with what's history.
Where do you think the creativity? What caused it?
Oh, who knows? Who knows?
That
I can't speculate. I don't know who started. I mean, it's like the story about NASA calling UFO Santa Claus. I've read that. You've read that.
Right.
Can you ever find a definitive source that says that where that came from or what the genesis of that was?
Right.
The answer is no. I've never seen it. And I've looked for it.
Right.
So who knows?
Wow. What about and again, only because you're on the phone on with us, and thank you, by the way. And everybody at Bell Gap's going to be talking tomorrow. Good job, Duke. What about what about this Gulf War incident over Saudi Arabia? Did you hear that?
No idea. Yeah, I heard that. I had no idea.
Yeah, me neither. I heard a little bit about it, but it just never went anywhere. So I had just forgotten about it until Mac brought it back up, not tonight, in a previous conversation, and I was like, wow, and he's got some detail in that story.
I will say this. Jimmy. If I'd feel much more comfortable about the story if the source was not a Russian officer.
Right.
Not that I'm doubting the authenticity of or the integrity of a Russian officer, but if we think back to the history of this, the Russians were allies of the Iraqis, or the Soviets, and then the Russians were allies of the Iraqis, and there were I think I've read that there were even still Russians in Iraq at the time of this war. I just don't know how viable it is that I'm convinced that a Russian military officer was allowed within a coalition military organization to watch what was going on. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I would think there would be some concern about the guy's, whether or not he was going to supply this information, back to Russia, who might send it on to Iraq and so forth and so on. I don't know if he had said this was an Indian officer or anybody else, I might buy it. But just the idea that a Russian was there and apparently granted access to coalition military facilities makes no sense to me.
That's I didn't quite. I was mainly focused on the fact that there was a retrieval, and the fact that there was seats for two very small bodies. Very. How do I want to say? I don't want to take away from Mac's story because the story itself is fine. It just had too many generic type of details to it. It was, you know what I mean? It was like, what kind of, well, let's fill in F-16. Let's write Iraq. Yeah. Let's make it the Gulf War, and let's make the date here. But everything else was just very generic. And you know me, Duke, you know me. Truth is in the details.
Yeah. Well, exactly right. That's what I started to say.
Yeah.
When I listen to stories like that, I listen to it from the point of view of somebody that spent a long time in the DoD and knowing how things are done and the way things are, the way things are, just the processes and things they do. And I listen and I think, does that pass a sanity check? If it had been anybody but a Russian officer, I might buy it. But everything else sounds like standard vanilla UFO recovery story.
Right.
But it's getting to that point that I start to have a little problem with.
Have you ever? I'm only asking you this because who you are. So I'm thinking.
I'm retired.
No. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about Art Bell. I listened to last week a show that I had never heard before, and I'll think Deke. What was Deke Richards? What was his name? Anyway, about the recovery of a craft in Germany. Have you ever heard that show with Art?
No, I have not.
Okay, you need to go check it out. I can't remember his last name, but I want to say it was Richards. Deke, D-E-E-K, Richards. And all the bell gabbers right now, they're listening. By the time you get off of this show tonight, there'll be a posting about it at Fade to Black. Okay, so it's not that big of a deal. But you need to go back and listen to that story. Because that story, even though, well, anyway, you know what I mean? There's similarities there. That's where I was going. So I was hoping you had heard it. And if you haven't, just go and listen. Just go back. And I can't remember where I found it, but somebody will post it on BellGab. And you've got to go back and listen to the Deke story about his participation in the recovery of a craft in Germany. And I'm going to say 1976. I think that's when it was. 76, 77, mid-70s, height of the Cold War, within spitting distance of Checkpoint Charlie, Russian military games going on with their tanks, or T-72s right over the horizon, and this craft comes down in the woods, in the forest, in the Black Forest. You got to listen to that. I'm surprised that maybe you have and you just don't remember it, but you've got to go back and check it out.
All right, I'll see what I can do.
Well, no, it's the similarities between the story tonight. That's all. All right. Well, hey, thanks for stopping by, my friend. And
all right,
I'll catch
up.
Good job
as usual. Great interview.
Thank you. And no, good job for you too as well. And I'll catch up with you in the forums tomorrow.
Good man. Thank you.
Thank you, Duke. Good night. All right, where were we? Okay, let's take that quick break. When we come back, we'll start to wrap up the show tonight. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Jimmy at jimmychurchradio.com. Follow us on Twitter at jchurchradio. Another great night. I had a lot of fun. We'll be back right after this to wrap things up. Don't touch that mouse. I will say good night.
Despite popular opinion, reading a book will not make you smarter.
But listening to Jimmy Church will. On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
He's always giving it to you straight.
JimmyChurchRadio.com. On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Erica, Brittany, Gabby, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
This is KJCR at jimmychurchradio.com.
On the Dark Matter Radio Network.
Oh, yeah. Fade to Black. KJCR. JimmyChurchRadio.com on the Dark Matter Radio Network. Another beautiful night here in Burbank. All right, let's kill the music. Okay, Jimmy at JimmyChurchRadio.com. That is what you do. Shoot us an email. I wanted to wrap things up really quick. I wanted to touch upon a few things. I wanted to jump over to CNN. There is no updates. Likelihood, this is the latest breaking news on Flight 370. Likelihood, plane is at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. Obvious, it says analysts from the U.S. intelligence, FAA, and NTSB, this again directly from CNN, conclude ping sent to satellite hours after the Flight 370's last transponder signal likely came from the missing jet. I think that, again, and I meant to say this earlier, or I think I started to allude to it. For them to say that they know nothing means that they know something. I don't know why they're holding back. That's the point. They're turning this into a big, crazy mystery. And I say this on this show all the time. Silence does one thing. It allows everybody else to fill in the blanks, to write their own story. You need to just come out and say what's going on. 239 families involved with this, and the flight crew. You know, it's just absolutely crazy to me. Okay, really quick, the video player, I want to make this very clear. There's a video player at jimmychurchradio.com for Mirage Men. I watched this documentary today. It freaked me out. It's disturbing. It really is. Why? Because it deals with the truth. And the truth is freaky. I said in the interview last night, and I want to emphasize this with this video, Mirage Men. I want to emphasize this. I said this last night. I told a story last night I probably shouldn't have shared. But you never know what truth is. You never know what reality is. You do not. And whenever you think you've got it figured out, you think you've got it all figured out. And then you'll find out later that you was wrong. And it doesn't matter what it is. No matter what you think is real. Doesn't matter. You find out later that it wasn't. And you was wrong. And it doesn't matter what it is. It can be the most mundane thing. It could be the most spectacular thing. And anywhere in between. But no matter what you think is real, the opposite turns out to be true. And with Mystery Men, I had posted this somewhere earlier this week. But what Mystery Men is about, and the Benowitz case, is, and go with me on this, it's a cover-up of a cover-up that they had to cover up with another cover-up. And that was done by telling the truth about a lie and then lying about the cover-up that was the truth, but they had to cover up the truth with a lie for the truth to come out. And that's the truth. So before you think you've got reality all dialed in, watch Mystery or Mirage Men. Just go check that out. Because that movie deals with some hard facts about how our government, the NSA, the OSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, how they were able to lie and manipulate and tell the truth to mess with people's heads on all fronts. And there was a lot of people involved. It wasn't just Benowitz. And I think you'll be surprised at the names that are involved. And I brought it up yesterday in the interview. I mean, were they mad? Were they angry? I'm here to tell you, I would have been. And if that would have been me in that position today, would I be talking about this? Oh, I would. but I would be angry. I would not be happy. And you've got to see how they deal with this in this show, in this documentary. It's absolutely extraordinary. Tomorrow night, Michio Kaku, live from New York. That's right. Like I said earlier, and I mean this, I've got 50, 75, it's more than that now, questions lined up that you have suggested. I understand the interest. I can't ask them all. I'm going to try to whittle it down to 3, 4, 5. Don't have all the time in the world. And it's my show. Bespoke Radio. This is Fade to Black. Tomorrow night, Michio Kaku. And it's going to be a great time. Let's start to close this out. Special thanks. Special thanks to Keith Rowland. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Kamurian. Show's produced by Hilton J. Palm and Mark D. Kovar. The D is there to separate him from all the other Kovars in the world, and there's a lot of them. Music, Doug Aldrich. You're listening to him right now from the album Electrovision. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR on the Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Everybody have a good night. Tomorrow night, Michio Kaku. Till then, behave, be well. See you tomorrow night. Thank you, everybody.